The thunderous call of Pope Urban II at the Council of Clermont in November 1095 reverberated across medieval Europe with unprecedented force. His impassioned plea for Christian warriors to march eastward and reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim control ignited a religious fervor that would fundamentally reshape the political and military landscape of both Europe and the Middle East. The Pope's promise of plenary indulgence, complete remission of sins for those who took up the cross, proved irresistible to nobles, knights, peasants, and clergy alike. Within months, massive armies began assembling across France, the Holy Roman Empire, and Norman territories, their banners bearing the distinctive red cross that would become synonymous with the crusading movement. The military expedition that followed exceeded even Urban's most optimistic expectations. The First Crusade, launched between 1096 and 1099, witnessed the convergence of multiple European armies under leaders such as Godfrey of Bouillon, Buron of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, and Tancred of Hauteville. These forces, numbering in the tens of thousands, embarked on an arduous journey across the Byzantine Empire and into Anatolia, facing not only the formidable military opposition of the Seljuk Turks and Fatimid Caliphate, but also the harsh realities of medieval warfare, disease, starvation, and logistical nightmares that claimed countless lives. The Crusaders' stunning capture of Antioch in June 1098, after an 8-month siege, demonstrated their military capabilities and unwavering determination. The city's massive walls, reinforced by over 400 towers, had withstood countless previous assaults, yet fell to a combination of tactical brilliance and sheer persistence. The subsequent massacre of the Muslim population sent shock waves throughout the Islamic world and established the Crusaders' reputation for both military prowess and ruthless efficiency. Jerusalem's fall on July 15th, 1099, marked the climactic achievement of the First Crusade. The city's ancient walls, which had protected the holy sites for centuries, crumbled under the sustained assault of siege engines constructed from timber, salvaged from Genoese and Pisan ships. Godfrey of Bouillon's forces breached the northern wall near Herod's Gate, while Tancred's men scaled the southern ramparts. The ensuing 3-day massacre eliminated virtually the entire Muslim and Jewish population, with contemporary chronicles describing blood flowing ankle-deep through the streets. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque were stripped of their Islamic decorations and converted to Christian worship, symbolically reclaiming what Crusaders viewed as the Temple of Solomon. The establishment of the Crusader states fundamentally altered the geopolitical balance of the Eastern Mediterranean. The county of Edessa, founded in 1098 under Baldwin of Bolan, controlled crucial trade routes between Mesopotamia and Anatolia. The Principality of Antioch, established by Beaumont, commanded the approaches to northern Syria and served as a bulwark against potential Turkish counterattacks. The county of Tripoli, carved out by Raymond of Toulouse, secured the coastal regions of modern-day Lebanon. Most significantly, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, with Godfrey of Bouillon as its first ruler bearing the title defender of the Holy, Cephala, encompassed the most sacred sites of Christianity. These net states faced immediate and persistent military challenges. The Fatimid Caliphate launched repeated attempts to recapture Jerusalem, culminating in the Battle of Escalon in August 1099, where Godfrey's forces decisively defeated a massive Egyptian army. Simultaneously, the fragmented nature of the Crusader states, separated by hundreds of miles and often pursuing conflicting political objectives, made coordinated defense increasingly difficult. The rulers of these territories, primarily younger sons of European nobility, seeking their fortunes in the East, found themselves governing populations that were overwhelmingly Muslim and Eastern Christian, creating complex administrative and military challenges. The success of the First Crusade triggered an unprecedented wave of pilgrimage to the Holy Land. European Christians, inspired by the Crusaders' victories and driven by genuine religious devotion, embarked on the journeys, to visit the sites of Christ's life, death, and resurrection. The Church of the Holy Sila, rebuilt and expanded under Crusader patronage, became the ultimate destination for these pilgrims. The Via Dolorosa, marking Christ's path to crucifixion, attracted thousands of faithful seeking spiritual purification through physical hardship and proximity to sacred locations. However, the pilgrimage routes presented extraordinary dangers. The journey from the Mediterranean ports of Jaffa and Acre to Jerusalem traversed approximately 60 m of treacherous terrain controlled by hostile Bedouin tribes, bandits, and remnants of defeated Muslim armies. The coastal road, while shorter, exposed travelers to maritime raiders and required crossing numerous rivers and ravines where ambushes were common. The inland route through the Judean hills offered some protection, but extended the journey considerably and passed through areas where water sources were scarce and easily poisoned. Contemporary accounts describe pilgrims traveling in large, heavily armed caravans for protection. Yet even these precautions proved insufficient. The chronicler Fulcher of Chartres recorded instances of entire pilgrim groups disappearing without trace. Their fate known only through scattered remains discovered months later by subsequent travelers. Muslim raiders familiar with the terrain and motivated by both religious fervor and economic opportunity could strike swiftly from concealed positions and vanish into the wilderness before Crusader patrols could respond. The financial burden of pilgrimage further complicated these journeys. Pilgrims required not only sufficient funds for transportation, lodging, and provisions, but also substantial sums for protection money demanded by various local authorities. Many sold their entire estates to finance these expeditions, leaving themselves vulnerable to exploitation and unable to return home if circumstances deteriorated. The death rate among pilgrims reached alarming proportions, with some estimates suggesting that fewer than half of those who departed Europe ever returned. It was within this context of triumph and peril that Hugh Deer, a minor nobleman from the Champagne region of France, arrived in Jerusalem sometime around 1115. Deer, whose family held modest lands near Troy, had likely participated in one of the subsequent crusading expeditions following the First Crusade success. His exact motivations for remaining in the Holy Land remain historically obscured, but contemporary sources suggest he was deeply troubled by the plight of Christian pilgrims and the inadequate protection provided by existing military forces. The Kingdom of Jerusalem's military structure, while effective for major campaigns, proved unsuited for the constant patrol duties required to secure pilgrimage routes. The feudal levies that formed the backbone of Crusader armies served limited terms and focused primarily on defending major fortifications and participating in seasonal campaigns against Muslim neighbors. Professional soldiers were expensive to maintain and often pursued more lucrative opportunities in the frequent wars between neighboring Crusader princes. Depes conceived of an entirely novel solution: a permanent military brotherhood combining the martial skills of knights with the spiritual discipline of monks. This revolutionary concept challenged traditional medieval assumptions about the incompatibility of warfare and religious devotion. Previously, the Church had viewed violence as inherently sinful, requiring extensive penance, even when employed in defense of Christian territory. The emerging crusading ideology, however, had begun to sanctify warfare against Islam as a form of religious service. Around 1119, Deans approached 8 companions with his proposal for forming this unprecedented religious military order. These founding members included Godfrey de Sanar, a knight from the Low Countries, Pondemontier from Picardy, a Chambeau de Saint-Agnion whose family held lands of Burgundy, André de Montbard, uncle to the future Saint Bernal of Clairvaux, Geoffrey Bison possibly of Norman origin, and Rosal, whose background remains largely unknown. 2 additional members whose names have not survived in historical records completed the original brotherhood. These men formally established their order in the presence of Warren, Patriarch of Jerusalem, taking vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience according to the rule of Saint Augustine. Their chosen name, Paparis Camillionis Christi Templique Salomonica. The poor fellow soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon reflected both their humble origins and their extraordinary mission. The designation poor emphasized their rejection of personal wealth and worldly advancement, while fellow soldiers stressed their equality and mutual dependence in both spiritual and military endeavors. The timing of the order's foundation coincided with a critical period in the Kingdom of Jerusalem's development. Bulwen I, Godfrey of Bouon's brother and successor as king, had died in April 1118 during a campaign along the Egyptian frontier. His cousin, Baldwin of Labor, Count of Edessa, accepted the crown as Bulwen II, but faced immediate challenges to his authority. The new king's unfamiliarity with southern Palestinian politics and his preoccupation with northern threats from Aleppo and Damascus created a power vacuum that various factions sought to exploit. Bulwen II's initial response to Depai's proposal reflected both skepticism and pragmatic calculation. The concept of warrior monks contradicted established ecclesiastical doctrine. Yet, the kingdom desperately needed reliable forces for routine security operations. The king's own military resources were stretched thin between defending Edessa, maintaining pressure on Damascus, and securing the vital port cities that provided the Crusader state's economic lifeline to Europe. After extensive consultation with his advisors and the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Baldwin II granted formal recognition to the new order in late 1119 or early 1120. This royal endorsement provided crucial legitimacy and legal protection for an organization that might otherwise have been dismissed as an unauthorized military band. More significantly, the king allocated quarters for the Brotherhood within his own palace complex located on the Temple Mount in the southeastern corner of Jerusalem's Old City. The Temple Mount, known in Arabic as Haram al-Sharif, held profound significance for all three Abrahamic religions. Jews revered it as the site of Solomon's temple and the second temple destroyed by the Romans in 70 CE. Muslims considered it the location of Muhammad's night journey and the third holiest site in Islam, housing both the Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque. Christians identified it with the temple where Christ had preached and driven out the money changers, making it integral to the gospel narrative. The Crusaders' conquest of Jerusalem had transformed the Temple Mount into a Christian complex. The Dome of the Rock, built by the Umayyad Caliph Abdul-Malik between 687 and 691 CE, was rededicated as the Templum Domen. Its magnificent golden dome, supported by an octagonal structure decorated with intricate mosaics and marble columns, dominated Jerusalem's skyline and symbolized Christian triumph over Islam. Al-Aqsa Mosque, constructed during the early 8th century, became the royal palace and was renamed Palladium Salomonis. Baldwin II's decision to house the new military order in this sacred precinct was both practical and symbolic. The Temple Mount's elevated position provided excellent observation of the surrounding countryside, allowing the knights to monitor potential threats and coordinate patrol activities. The existing structures offered adequate accommodation for a small brotherhood, while their proximity to the royal palace facilitated regular communication with royal officials. The symbolic implications proved equally significant. By associating the new order with Solomon's temple, Bulwen II connected their mission to the biblical king renowned for his wisdom, justice, and devotion to God. This connection resonated powerfully with contemporary Christian understanding of the Crusades as a restoration of the biblical Israel under Christian rule. The knights' daily presence at the site where Solomon had built the original temple reinforced their role as guardians of sacred space and defenders of divine will. The Brotherhood's adoption of the name Knights of the Temple, or Knights Templar, reflected this profound association with their headquarters location. Unlike other military orders that would later adopt geographical designations or patron saints, the Templars identified themselves specifically with the Temple of Solomon, claiming spiritual inheritance of the biblical king's mission to serve God through righteous governance and military prowess. The early years following their establishment witnessed gradual expansion of the Templars' activities and influence. Initially numbering only 9 members, the order faced significant challenges in fulfilling their ambitious mandate to protect all Christian pilgrims throughout the Holy Land. Their limited numbers required careful strategic planning and cooperation with existing military forces, including the Royal Army, municipal militias, and mercenary companies employed by various nobles. The Knights developed innovative tactical approaches suited to their unique mission. Rather than engaging in large-scale battles, they specialized in reconnaissance, rapid response to reported attacks, and escort duties for particularly vulnerable pilgrim groups. Their intimate knowledge of local terrain, gained through constant patrol activities, made them invaluable intelligence sources for royal military planning. Their religious vows and distinctive white mantles marked with red crosses made them easily recognizable to both pilgrims seeking protection and enemies contemplating attacks. The recognition that would transform the small brotherhood of 9 knights into one of medieval Europe's most powerful institutions began to crystallize in the mid-1120s as reports of their activities reached the highest echelons of the Catholic Church. The Templars' unique combination of monastic discipline and military effectiveness had attracted considerable attention from influential ecclesiastical figures, particularly those connected to the emerging Sisters Reform movement. Their success in reducing pilgrim casualties along the Jerusalem-Jaffa Road, combined with their strict adherence to religious observances despite their martial duties, suggested a revolutionary solution to the Church's long-standing theological dilemma regarding the moral implications of Christian warfare. Bernard of Clairvaux, the charismatic abbot of Clairvaux and nephew of founding Templar André de Montbard, emerged as the Brotherhood's most influential advocate within church hierarchy. Bernard's reputation as a theologian and reformer had already established him as one of Europe's most respected religious voices by the 1120s. His involvement with the Templars began through family connections, but evolved into genuine conviction that their mission represented divine providence in action. Bernard's correspondence from this period reveals his growing belief that the Templars embodied a new form of Christian knighthood that could reconcile the apparent contradiction between gospel teachings of peace and the practical necessity of defending Christian territories through force of arms. The Cistercian movement, of which Bernard was the most prominent leader, emphasized strict adherence to the original rule of Saint Benedict, rejecting the accumulated wealth and political entanglements that had corrupted many older monastic orders. The Cistercians' commitment to poverty, manual labor, and spiritual purification through edict discipline aligned closely with the Templars' own vows and practices. This theological compatibility provided a foundation for Bernard's advocacy and would later influence the formal structure of Templar governance. Hugh Depon's departure from Jerusalem around 1127 marked the beginning of a crucial diplomatic mission to secure papal recognition and financial support for his order. The Templar Grand Master journey to Europe coincided with growing awareness among church leaders that the Crusader estates required permanent military institutions capable of sustained operations against Muslim forces. The traditional feudal levies that had conquered Jerusalem proved inadequate for the long-term defense of territories surrounded by hostile neighbors and dependent on tenuous supply lines stretching across the Mediterranean. Depay's arrival in France generated considerable interest among the nobility, many of whom had relatives who had participated in crusading expeditions or undertaken pilgrimages to the Holy Land. His personal accounts of the dangers facing Christian pilgrims and the Templars' efforts to provide protection resonated with audiences familiar with the realities of Eastern warfare. More importantly, His descriptions of the order's religious discipline and military effectiveness appealed to church officials seeking to channel the martial energies of European knighthood toward constructive religious purposes. The momentum building behind Templar recognition culminated in Pope Honorius II's decision to convene a special ecclesiastical council at Troyes in January 1129. The choice of location proved strategically significant as Troyes served as the capital of Champagne, Eudipaean's home region, and hosted one of medieval Europe's most important commercial fairs. The presence of numerous bishops, abbots, and secular nobles attending the fair provided an ideal audience for deliberations regarding the Templars' future status within the church hierarchy. The Council of Troyes assembled an impressive array of ecclesiastical and secular authorities. Cardinal Matthew of Albano presided as papal legate representing Honorius II's direct authority. The archbishops of Reims and Sens attended alongside 10 bishops from across France, including the influential sees of Chartres-Soissons and Auxerre. The abbots of prominent monasteries, including Cîteaux, Clairvaux, Pontigny, and Troyes itself, brought their theological expertise to bear on the complex questions surrounding the legitimacy of warrior monks. Secular nobles, including Count Theobald II of Champagne and Count William of Navarre, provided practical perspectives on the military and political implications of formal recognition. Bernard of Clairvaux's presence at the council proved decisive in shaping the proceedings' outcome. His theological authority and personal advocacy for the Templars carried enormous weight with assembled prelates. Bernard's presentation emphasized the order's strict adherence to monastic vows while demonstrating how their military activities served legitimate religious purposes. He argued that the Templars' willingness to risk death in defense of Christian pilgrims constituted the highest form of Christian charity, transforming potentially sinful violence into meritorious religious service. The council's deliberations addressed fundamental questions about the compatibility of monastic vows with military service. Traditional church doctrine had long maintained that monks should avoid bloodshed and focus exclusively on prayer, manual labor, and spiritual contemplation. The Templars' mission required them to kill enemies in battle while maintaining the spiritual purity expected of religious brothers. This apparent contradiction demanded careful theological analysis and innovative interpretations of existing canonical authorities. The assembled bishops examined precedents from early Christian history, including the military saints venerated by the Eastern churches and the warrior bishops who had defended Christian territories during the barbarian invasions. They considered the theological implications of the just war theory developed by St. Augustine, which permitted Christian participation in warfare under specific circumstances. The concept of holy war, legitimized by papal authorization of the Crusades, provided additional justification for the Templars' activities. After extensive debate, the council reached unanimous agreement to grant formal recognition to the Knights Templar as a legitimate religious order within the Catholic Church. This decision represented a revolutionary development in medieval ecclesiastical law, establishing the first formal precedent for combining monastic vows with military service. The council's approval carried the full authority of papal endorsement, protecting the Templars from accusations of heresy or unauthorized innovation. The council simultaneously addressed the practical necessity of establishing formal regulations governing Templar conduct and organization. The assembled authorities recognized that the order's unique mission required specialized rules addressing both monastic discipline and military operations. They commissioned Bernard of Clairvaux to draft a comprehensive rule drawing upon existing monastic traditions while accommodating the specific requirements of warrior monks operating in hostile territory. Bernard's resulting document, known as the Primitive Rule or Latin Rule, established the fundamental framework for Templar governance that would endure throughout the order's existence. The rule contained 72 articles addressing every aspect of Templar life, from daily religious observances to battlefield conduct. Bernard drew heavily upon the rule of Saint Benedict, which had governed Western monasticism for centuries, while incorporating elements from the Cistercian reforms that emphasized poverty, obedience, and spiritual purification. The Templar rule mandated 3 daily masses for all brothers capable of attending, with additional prayer services marking the canonical hours observed by traditional monasteries. Knights unable to participate in formal services due to military duties were required to recite specified numbers of patasters as substitutes. The rule emphasized the importance of silence during meals, communal sleeping arrangements to prevent private associations that might undermine collective loyalty, and strict limitations on personal possessions. Military provisions within the rule addressed the conduct expected of Templars during combat operations. Brothers were forbidden from requesting quarter when captured by enemies, reflecting their commitment to fight to the death rather than compromise their mission through surrender. The rules specified procedures for maintaining weapons and equipment, emphasized the importance of discipline during battle formations, and established protocols for coordinating with other Christian military forces. The rule's dietary regulations reflected both monastic traditions and practical military requirements. Templars were permitted to eat meat 3 times weekly to maintain the physical strength necessary for combat operations. A significant departure from traditional monastic practices that emphasized vegetarian diets. The rule specified fasting periods corresponding to the church calendar, while allowing modifications during active campaigns when nutritional requirements might conflict with religious observances. Disciplinary procedures outlined in the rule established a hierarchical system of punishments for violations ranging from minor infractions to serious breaches of conduct. Lesser offenses resulted in temporary restrictions on privileges or additional manual labor assignments. More serious violations could lead to expulsion from the order, effectively ending a brother's religious and military career. The rule emphasized the importance of confession and penance in maintaining spiritual purity while acknowledging the moral complexities inherent in their dual mission. Following the Council of Troyes, Bernard of Clairvaux undertook composition of his influential treatise, De Novo Militia, which provided comprehensive theological justification for the Templar concept. This document, completed around 1130 and dedicated to Huda, represented one of medieval Christianity's most sophisticated attempts to reconcile martial activities with religious devotion. Benner's arguments would influence church attitudes towards military orders for centuries and establish intellectual foundations for subsequent crusading ideology. Bernard's treatise distinguished sharply between secular knighthood motivated by worldly ambitions and personal glory and the new knighthood embodied by the Templars, which served exclusively religious purposes. He argued that conventional knights fought for material gain, territorial expansion, and social advancement, making their violence morally questionable regardless of their tactical success. The Templars, by contrast, had renounced personal wealth and worldly honors, transforming their military service into a form of religious devotion comparable to monastic prayer or charitable works. The concept of malicide, rather than homicide, formed a central element of Bernard's theological framework. He contended that Templars did not commit murder when killing Muslim enemies, but rather eliminated evil itself, purifying the world of forces opposed to Christian truth. This distinction allowed Bernard to argue that Templar violence served redemptive purposes, contributing to the ultimate triumph of divine will over satanic opposition. Such reasoning provided powerful psychological support for knights struggling to reconcile their religious vows with the brutal realities of medieval warfare. Bernard's treatise also addressed the spiritual benefits accruing to those who supported the Templars through donations, prayers, or other forms of assistance. He argued that contributing to the order's mission earned participants in their meritorious activities, allowing non-combatants to share in the spiritual rewards of defending Christian pilgrims and holy sites. This doctrine would prove crucial in generating the financial support necessary for Templar expansion throughout Europe. Pope Honorius II's formal bull recognizing the Templars issued in 1129 following the Council of Troyes granted the order extraordinary privileges that distinguished them from conventional monastic institutions. The papal document confirmed the Templars' right to maintain their headquarters on the Temple Mount and extended papal protection to all their properties and personnel. More significantly, the bull granted the order exemption from local ecclesiastical authority, making them answerable directly to the papal see rather than regional bishops or archbishops. This exemption from episcopal jurisdiction represented an unprecedented grant of autonomy within the medieval church hierarchy. Conventional monastic orders remained subject to oversight by local bishops who could investigate their activities, review their finances, and intervene in disciplinary matters. The Templars' direct relationship with the papacy freed them from such local interference while providing access to the highest levels of church authority for resolving disputes or securing additional privileges. The bull also confirmed the Templars' right to receive tithes and donations from the faithful, establishing a legal foundation for the extensive fundraising networks that would soon span medieval Europe. Unlike conventional religious orders, which typically relied on income from agricultural estates or fees for religious services, the Templars were authorized to solicit contributions specifically for their military mission. This authorization would prove instrumental in generating the vast wealth necessary to maintain castles, armies, and supply networks across the Mediterranean world. Additional privileges granted by subsequent papal bulls expanded Templar autonomy even further. Pope Innocent II Bull Omen Datum Optimum issued in 1139 granted the Templars the right to build their own churches and maintain their own clergy, effectively creating an independent ecclesiastical structure parallel to the regular church hierarchy. This privilege allowed the order to provide religious services to their personnel and supporters without relying on potentially hostile local priests or bishops. The same bull confirmed the Templars' exemption from paying tithes to local churches while maintaining their right to collect such payments from others. This asymmetrical arrangement generated considerable resentment among secular clergy who found themselves competing with a tax-exempt organization for the same sources of revenue. The resulting tensions would persist throughout the Templars' existence and contribute to the eventual opposition that led to their suppression. Pope Innocent II also granted the Templars the right to absolve their own members from certain categories of sin, reducing their dependence on external ecclesiastical authority for maintaining spiritual discipline. This privilege proved particularly valuable given the moral complexities of their military mission and the practical difficulties of accessing conventional confession and penance while operating in hostile territory. The ability to provide immediate spiritual relief for brothers troubled by the violence inherent in their duties helped maintain morale and religious commitment under extreme circumstances. The accumulation of these extraordinary privileges transformed the Knights Templar from a small brotherhood of 9 knights into an autonomous religious military corporation operating under direct papal authority. Their unique legal status provided unprecedented freedom of action while generating the resources necessary to fulfill their expanding mission. The theological legitimacy provided by Bernard of Clairvaux's advocacy and the institutional support guaranteed by papal recognition established foundations for what would become medieval Europe's most powerful and influential military order. The papal recognition secured at the Council of Troyes unleashed a torrent of recruitment and financial support that transformed the Knights Templar from a modest brotherhood into medieval Europe's most formidable military organization. Within a decade of receiving formal church approval, the order had established a sophisticated network of commanderies, preceptories, and recruitment centers stretching from the windswept moors of Scotland to the sun-baked plains of Iberia and the dense forests of Eastern Europe. This remarkable expansion reflected not only the order's growing reputation for military effectiveness, but also the urgent need for permanent military institutions capable of defending the precarious Crusade estates against increasingly coordinated Muslim counterattacks. The Templar expansion strategy focused initially on regions with strong crusading traditions and existing networks of noble families who had participated in the conquest of Jerusalem. France, as the birthplace of both the crusading movement and the Templar order itself, provided the most fertile ground for recruitment and fundraising. The great noble houses of Champagne, Burgundy, and Normandy competed to demonstrate their piety through generous donations of land, money, and younger sons seeking military careers sanctified by religious purpose. The county of Champagne alone contributed over 30 major estates to the Templars by 1150, creating a concentration of resources that would serve as the order's primary European power base throughout its existence. English expansion began in earnest following King Stephen's grant of the manor of Cressing in Essex around 1137, establishing the Templars' first significant foothold across the Channel. The English nobility, many of whom trace their ancestry to Norman conquerors who had participated in the First Crusade, proved remarkably generous in their support. Within 2 decades, the Templars controlled extensive properties in Yorkshire, Lincolnshire, Warwickshire, and Somerset, generating substantial annual revenues through agricultural production, wool exports, and urban rents. The Order's English headquarters at Temple Church in London, constructed between 1160 and 1185, featured innovative circular architecture inspired by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, symbolically connecting English supporters with the sacred sites their donations helped protect. The Templars' expansion into the Iberian Peninsula capitalized on the ongoing Reconquista campaigns against Muslim Taifa kingdoms. The Christian monarchs of Castile, Leon, Aragon, and Portugal viewed the Templars as valuable allies in their territorial expansion southward, granting extensive frontier territories in exchange for military service against Islamic forces. These Iberian commanderies served dual purposes, generating revenue for operations in the Holy Land while simultaneously advancing Christian territorial gains in Western Europe. The fortress of Ponferrada in Lyon, granted to the Templars in 1178, controlled crucial mountain passes used by pilgrims traveling to Santiago de Compostela, while serving as a base for raids against Muslim territories further south. German recruitment proved more challenging due to the complex political situation within the Holy Roman Empire and competition from other military orders, particularly the Teutonic Knights, who focused primarily on campaigns in the Baltic region. Nevertheless, the Templars established significant commanderies in Bavaria, Swabia, and the Rhineland, often receiving donations from noble families seeking to demonstrate their commitment to the crusading cause. The Templar church at Tempelhof near Berlin, constructed in the distinctive circular style favored by the order, served as a recruitment center for knights seeking to fulfill crusading vows through service in the Holy Land, rather than participating in the brutal northern crusades against pagan Slavic tribes. Eastern European expansion reflected the Templars' strategic understanding of the importance of controlling trade routes connecting Western Europe with Constantinople and the Eastern Mediterranean. Commanderies established in Hungary, Poland, and Bohemia served as staging areas for knights and supplies traveling overland to the Holy Land while generating revenue from tolls levied on merchants using these vital commercial arteries. The Templars' presence in these regions also provided valuable intelligence regarding Byzantine political developments and potential threats from nomadic peoples migrating westward from the steppes. The organizational structure that emerged to manage this vast network reflected sophisticated administrative practices adapted from both monastic traditions and contemporary commercial enterprises. Each commander operated under the authority of a preceptor responsible for managing local resources, recruiting new members, and forwarding surplus revenues to higher authorities. Preceptors typically came from noble backgrounds and possessed both military experience and administrative skills necessary for managing complex agricultural and commercial operations. They maintained detailed records of income and expenditures, personnel assignments, and military obligations, creating an unprecedented level of bureaucratic efficiency within a medieval military organization. Regional commanders known as Grand Preceptors or Provincial Masters supervised multiple commanders within specific geographical areas and serve as intermediaries between local operations and the Order's central leadership in Jerusalem. These positions required individuals capable of navigating complex political relationships with secular and ecclesiastical authorities while maintaining the military readiness necessary for potential deployment to active combat zones. The Grand Price of France, based at the Temple in Paris, controlled the Order's largest European network and wielded influence comparable to that of major noble houses. The military hierarchy that developed within the Templars reflected both the practical requirements of medieval warfare and the religious principles underlying their mission. At the apex stood the Grand Master, elected by a complex process involving representatives from throughout the Order and serving until death or voluntary resignation. The Grand Master possessed ultimate authority over all Templar operations from strategic military planning to financial management and diplomatic relations with secular and ecclesiastical powers. His distinctive seal, featuring two knights riding a single horse to symbolize the Order's commitment to poverty and mutual dependence, became one of medieval Europe's most recognizable symbols of authority. Below the Grand Master, the Sentinel served as the Order's second-in-command and primary military coordinator. This position required extensive combat experience and demonstrated leadership capabilities, as the Sentinel often commanded Templar forces during the Grand Master's absence or incapacitation. The marshal responsible for military discipline and tactical training oversaw the Order's combat readiness and supervised the maintenance of weapons, armor, and horses. His authority extended to all matters relating to battlefield conduct and the enforcement of military regulations established by the Templar rule. The Treasurer managed the Order's vast financial resources, coordinating the flow of revenues from European commanderies to support operations in the Holy Land. This position demanded sophisticated understanding of international commerce, currency exchange, and the complex logistics of transferring wealth across vast distances. The Templars' development of innovative banking practices, including letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit funds in Europe and withdraw equivalent amounts in Jerusalem, reflected the Treasurer's crucial role in maintaining the Order's financial stability. The distinctive white mantles worn by Templar knights served multiple practical and symbolic purposes beyond simple identification. The white wool fabric, often imported from England or Flanders, represented purity of purpose and spiritual cleanliness, distinguishing the Templars from secular knights, who typically wore colorful heraldic displays advertising their family connections and territorial claims. The red cross emblazed on the left shoulder, added following papal authorization in 1147, symbolized the knights' willingness to shed their blood in defense of Christian faith and holy sites. The practical advantages of standardized uniforms extended beyond symbolic significance. The distinctive white mantles made Templar forces easily recognizable on chaotic medieval battlefields, facilitating coordination between different units and preventing friendly fire incidents that plagued armies composed of various feudal contingents wearing different colors and symbols. The psychological impact on both allies and enemies proved equally important, as the sight of disciplined ranks of white-mantled knights became synonymous with elite military prowess and unwavering determination. Sergeant brothers, drawn primarily from non-noble backgrounds, wore brown or black mantles and served as the backbone of Templar military operations. These men provided essential support services, including maintenance of equipment, care of horses, construction and repair of fortifications, and specialized combat roles, such as crossbow operations and siege engineering. Their training emphasized practical skills and technical expertise rather than the chivalric ideals associated with knightly combat, making them invaluable for the diverse challenges of warfare in the Holy Land. The Templars' reputation for military excellence derived primarily from their revolutionary approach to heavy cavalry tactics and their unprecedented level of discipline and coordination. Medieval warfare had traditionally relied on individual prowess and personal combat between knights seeking glory and ransom opportunities. The Templars transformed cavalry charges into precisely coordinated attacks, resembling modern military formations, with each knight maintaining specific position and role within the larger tactical unit. Their horses, carefully selected for size, strength, and temperament, underwent extensive training to remain calm during combat and respond to subtle commands that allowed riders to maintain formation while wielding weapons. The Templars typically rode destriers, powerful war horses capable of carrying a fully armored knight at high speed while possessing sufficient agility for battlefield maneuvers. These animals represented enormous investments, often costing more than a peasant family's total annual income, and their care required specialized knowledge of veterinary medicine, nutrition, and breeding practices. Templar armor evolved throughout the 12th century to incorporate the latest technological developments while maintaining standardization across the order. Knights wore mail hauberks extending from neck to knee, constructed from thousands of interlocking iron rings that provided excellent protection against slashing attacks, while allowing sufficient flexibility for mounted combat. Helmets progressed from simple conical designs to more sophisticated barrel helms that offered complete facial protection at the cost of reduced visibility and ventilation. The distinctive kite shields bore the Order's red cross on white background, creating uniform appearance that reinforced unit cohesion. The tactical innovations introduced by the Templars influenced military practices throughout medieval Europe and the Mediterranean world. Their emphasis on disciplined charges, coordinated maneuvers, and mutual support contrasted sharply with the individualistic approach favored by most contemporary knights. Templar formations maintained strict order during advances, with knights positioned according to experience and specific battlefield roles rather than social rank or personal preference. This professional approach to warfare proved devastatingly effective against opponents accustomed to exploiting the chaos and disorganization typical of medieval battles. The Siege of Ascalon in 1153 demonstrated the full extent of Templar military capabilities and established their reputation as the Crusader state's most reliable shock troops. The fortress city of Ascalon, located on the Mediterranean coast southwest of Jerusalem, had served as the primary base for Fatimid raids into Crusader territory since the conquest of Jerusalem. Its massive walls, reinforced with numerous towers and protected by extensive outworks, had withstood multiple previous siege attempts and represented the most formidable defensive position remaining under Muslim control in southern Palestine. King Bulwin III of Jerusalem's decision to launch a comprehensive siege of Ascalon in January 1153 reflected both strategic necessity and growing confidence in Crusader military capabilities. The city's location allowed Fatimid forces to intercept pilgrimage routes, raid agricultural settlements, and maintain communication with Cairo, creating a persistent threat to the kingdom's southern frontier. Previous attempts to neutralize this threat through diplomacy or limited military action had failed, leaving full-scale siege warfare as the only viable option. The Templars contributed approximately 300 knights and 1,000 sergeant brothers to the siege force, representing the largest concentration of their military power ever assembled for a single operation. Grand Master Bernard Tremble personally commanded the Templar contingent, bringing decades of combat experience and intimate knowledge of siege warfare techniques. The Order's participation provided the Crusader army with unmatched expertise in siege engineering, including the construction and operation of massive wooden towers, battering rams, and stone-throwing engines. The siege progressed through conventional stages of medieval warfare, with Crusader forces establishing camps surrounding the city, constructing siege engines, and launching repeated assaults against the walls. Ascalon's defenders, commanded by experienced Fatimid officers and supported by the city's substantial civilian population, mounted fierce resistance that inflicted heavy casualties on the attackers. The summer heat, limited water supplies, and constant threat of disease created additional challenges that tested the endurance and discipline of the besieging forces. The decisive breakthrough came on August 19th, 1153, when Crusader siege engines succeeded in creating a substantial breach in Ascalon's eastern wall. The Templars, positioned at the point of maximum danger, prepared to lead the assault through the gap in the fortifications. Bernard Tremble's tactical planning emphasized speed and coordination, recognizing that the defenders would attempt to seal the breach if given sufficient time to organize their response. The Templar assault began at dawn with a precisely coordinated charge through the breach, led by Grandmaster Bernard himself. The knights advanced in tight formation, their white mantles and red crosses clearly visible through the dust and smoke of battle. The initial penetration succeeded in establishing a foothold within the city's defenses, but the confined space of the breach prevented the deployment of large numbers of knights simultaneously. This tactical limitation forced the Templars to maintain their position with minimal reinforcement while facing counterattacks from defenders familiar with the urban terrain. The fighting within Ascalon streets demonstrated the brutal realities of medieval siege warfare. The narrow passages between buildings negated many advantages of heavy cavalry, forcing knights to fight on foot with swords, maces, and axes in close quarters combat. The Templars' superior armor and weapons provided significant advantages, but their unfamiliarity with the city's layout and the defenders' desperate resistance created a chaotic meal that lasted for hours. Bernard de Tremble's death during the street fighting marked both a personal tragedy for the Templars and a tactical turning point in the siege. The Granum's fall, struck down by a crossbow bolt while leading an assault on a barricaded intersection, temporarily disrupted Templar coordination and allowed Fatimid defenders to mount an effective counterattack. However, the discipline and training that characterized the order prevented complete collapse as senior knights assumed command and maintained their positions despite heavy casualties. The eventual fall of Ascalon on August 22nd, 1153 represented one of the Crusader states' most significant military victories and established the Templars' reputation as elite shock troops capable of decisive action under extreme conditions. The city's capture eliminated the last major Fatimid stronghold in Palestine and secured the kingdom's southern frontier for the remainder of the 12th century. The Templars' crucial role in achieving this victory enhanced their prestige throughout the Christian world and attracted additional recruits and financial support for their expanding operations. The strategic implications of the Templars' growing military reputation extended far beyond individual battlefield victories. Their proven effectiveness in siege warfare, cavalry charges, and defensive operations made them invaluable allies for Crusader rulers facing constant military pressure from Muslim neighbors. The Order's willingness to accept the most dangerous assignments and their reputation for fighting to the death rather than surrendering provided psychological advantages that often proved as important as their tactical skills. The Templars' establishment of major fortifications throughout the Holy Land reflected their strategic understanding of the defensive requirements necessary for maintaining Crusader control over conquered territories. These castles served multiple purposes, functioning as military bases, administrative centers, recruitment facilities, and symbols of Christian authority over predominantly Muslim populations. The architectural innovations and defensive technologies employed in Templar fortifications influenced castle design throughout medieval Europe and established new standards for military engineering. Castle Pilgrim, known in Arabic as Atlet, represented the pinnacle of Templar fortress construction and demonstrated the order's sophisticated understanding of both military architecture and strategic positioning. Located on a rocky promontory extending into the Mediterranean Sea approximately 10 miles south of Haifa, the castle commanded crucial coastal routes connecting the northern Crusader states with Jerusalem. Its construction begun in 1218 under the direction of master builder Brother Walter, incorporated the latest developments in military engineering while taking advantage of the site's natural defensive advantages. The castle's massive walls, constructed from precisely cut limestone blocks weighing several tons, each rose directly from the rocky shoreline to heights exceeding 100 feet. The seaward approach remained virtually impregnable due to the combination of natural cliffs and artificial fortifications. While the landward defenses featured multiple concentric walls, deep ditches carved from solid rock, and carefully positioned towers providing overlapping fields of fire. The main keep, rising 130 feet above sea level, served as both final defensive position and symbol of Templar authority, visible from miles away. The logistical challenges of constructing such massive fortifications in a hostile environment demonstrated the Templars' organizational capabilities and financial resources. The transportation of the building materials, including specialized limestone from quarries near Jerusalem, required coordination of maritime and overland supply networks. The skilled craftsmen necessary for precision stonework had to be recruited from across Europe and provided with security housing and supplies throughout the construction process. The estimated cost of Castle Pilgrim exceeded the annual revenues of many European kingdoms, reflecting the Templars' extraordinary wealth and commitment to maintaining their defensive responsibilities. Tortosa, another major Templar stronghold located on the Syrian coast north of Tripoli, illustrated different aspects of the order's strategic thinking and architectural innovation. Unlike Castle Pilgrim's emphasis on impregnable defense, Tortosa served as both fortress and commercial center, generating revenue through control of maritime trade while providing military support for the county of Tripoli. The castle's design incorporated extensive storage facilities for grain, weapons, and other supplies, enabling it to withstand prolonged sieges while serving as a supply depot for other Crusader positions. The Templars' network of smaller fortifications throughout the Holy Land created an integrated defensive system that maximized their limited manpower while controlling key strategic positions. These outposts, typically garrisoned by 20, 50 knights and sergeants, served as early warning systems, patrol bases, and refugees for Christian populations during Muslim raids. Their strategic positioning along major roads, mountain passes, and river crossings created obstacles that forced potential invaders to either assault well-defended positions or undertake lengthy detours that exposed them to counterattack. The architectural features that characterized Templar fortifications reflected both practical military requirements and symbolic considerations related to their religious mission. The distinctive round towers favored by Templar architects provided superior defensive capabilities compared to traditional square designs, while requiring fewer defenders to maintain effective coverage of surrounding terrain. The integration of chapels within fortress complexes ensured that garrison personnel could fulfill their religious obligations without compromising military readiness. While the prominent display of Templar crosses and religious symbols reinforced the order's spiritual authority over the territories they controlled, the defensive strategies employed by the Templars emphasized mobility, coordination, and the effective use of superior equipment and training to overcome numerical disadvantages. Their tactical doctrine recognized that the Crusader states could not match the manpower resources available to their Muslim neighbors, and therefore required military approaches that maximize the effectiveness of limited forces. The development of rapid response capabilities, sophisticated intelligence networks, and coordinated operations between multiple fortifications created defensive advantages that persisted throughout the 12th century. Despite increasing pressure from unified Muslim forces under leaders such as Noradin and Saladin, the transformation of the Knights Templar from a purely military order into Europe's most sophisticated financial institution began gradually during the mid-12th century, driven by the practical necessities of funding their expanding operations across multiple continents. The Order's unique position as a trusted religious organization with extensive international networks created opportunities for financial innovation that secular merchants and traditional monastic institutions could not match. Their reputation for absolute honesty, reinforced by religious vows and papal protection, provided the foundation of trust essential for complex financial transactions spanning vast distances and multiple currencies. The initial catalyst for Templar involvement in banking emerged from the practical challenges faced by pilgrims traveling to the Holy Land. Medieval pilgrims typically carried large quantities of gold and silver coins to cover expenses during journeys that could last months or years, making them attractive targets for bandits, pirates, and corrupt officials. The physical weight of sufficient coinage for a complete pilgrimage often exceeded what individuals could safely transport, while the constant threat of theft created anxiety that detracted from the spiritual purposes of their journeys. Additionally, the bewildering variety of local currencies encountered during travel across multiple kingdoms and territories created confusion and opportunities for exploitation by unscrupulous money changers. The Templar solution to these problems revolutionized medieval commerce and established the foundation for modern banking practices. Beginning around 1150, the Order began issuing letters of credit that allowed pilgrims to deposit funds at any Templar commander in Europe and withdraw equivalent amounts at their destination in the Holy Land. These documents, written in Latin and authenticated with distinctive Templar seals, functioned as the world's first international checks and eliminated the need to transport large quantities of precious metals across dangerous territories. The technical sophistication of the Templar credit system required careful coordination between commanderies separated by thousands of miles and communication delays measured in months. Each letter of credit contains specific details regarding the depositor's identity, the amount deposited, the exchange rate applied, and the designated recipient location. Templar scribes developed standardized formats and authentication procedures that prevented forgery while ensuring that documents remained valid despite the extended time periods often required for international travel. The Order's extensive network of commanderies, preceptories, and allied institutions provided the infrastructure necessary to honor these financial instruments throughout Europe and the Mediterranean world. The mathematical precision required for currency exchange operations demonstrated the Templars' sophisticated understanding of international commerce and monetary systems. Exchange rates fluctuated constantly based on the relative availability of different metals, political stability in various regions, and seasonal variations in trade patterns. Templar treasurers maintained detailed records of exchange rates across dozens of different currencies, including the gold bezants of Constantinople, silver dinars of France, sterling pennies of England, and the various Islamic dinars and dirhams circulating throughout the Mediterranean. Their ability to calculate accurate exchange rates and predict currency movements provided significant advantages in international transactions. The Order's reputation for financial integrity attracted deposits from sources far beyond the pilgrimage trade. European nobles facing temporary cash shortages discovered that Templar Commander offered more reliable and convenient banking services than traditional Jewish moneylenders or Italian merchant banks. The religious prohibition against usury that theoretically prevented Christians from charging interest on loans proved less restrictive in practice as the Templars developed sophisticated methods for generating profits for financial services while maintaining technical compliance with church doctrine. Service charges levied on currency exchange and fund transfers provided legitimate sources of revenue that avoided the canonical prohibition against usury. The Templars typically charged fees ranging from 2 to 5% of the transaction value justified as compensation for the administrative costs, security risks, and currency fluctuations involved in international transfers. These charges generated substantial profits, while remaining within acceptable bounds established by contemporary religious authorities. The order's careful documentation of all fees and their religious justification helped deflect potential accusations of violating church teachings regarding money lending. The development of more sophisticated loan instruments allowed the Templars to provide credit services while maintaining the appearance of compliance with those prohibitions. Rather than charging explicit interest on loans, the order employed various techniques, such as currency exchange premiums, delayed payment penalties, and complex repayment schedules that effectively generated interest income without violating canonical restrictions. These financial innovations influenced banking practices throughout medieval Europe and established precedents that would later be adopted by Italian merchant banks and other commercial institutions. The Templars' involvement in international trade, financing expanded their financial operations far beyond simple pilgrimage services. Merchants engaged in long-distance commerce required credit facilities to purchase goods, finance transportation, and cover expenses during extended trading expeditions. The Order's international network and reputation for reliability made them ideal partners for commercial ventures spanning multiple countries and currencies. Templar letters of credit facilitated trade between England and the Holy Land, France and Constantinople, and numerous other international commercial relationships that would have been impossible without reliable financial intermediaries. The agricultural estates that formed the foundation of Templar wealth required sophisticated management techniques that transformed medieval farming practices and generated unprecedented levels of productivity. The Order's approach to estate management combined monastic discipline with commercial efficiency, creating agricultural operations that served as models for rural development throughout Europe. Templar agricultural innovations included crop rotation systems, improved breeding programs for livestock, advanced irrigation techniques, and a systematic application of organic fertilizers that increased yields far beyond those achieved by traditional farming methods. The Templar estates in England exemplified the Order's agricultural expertise and demonstrated their ability to transform marginal lands into highly productive properties. The commandery at Temple Brewer in Lincolnshire controlled over 20,000 acres of agricultural land, sheep pastures, and woodland that generated annual revenues exceeding those of many royal estates. The Templars' systematic approach to land management included detailed surveys of soil quality, drainage patterns, and microclimatic conditions that allowed them to optimize crop selection and farming techniques for specific parcels of land. Sheep farming emerged as one of the most profitable aspects of Templar agricultural operations, particularly in England, where the Order controlled extensive grazing lands ideally suited for wool production. The Templars developed selective breeding programs that improved wool quality while increasing the size and hardiness of their flocks. Their sheep produced fine wool that commanded premium prices in the growing textile markets of Flanders and northern Italy. The Order's vertical integration of wool production from breeding and shearing through processing and marketing maximized profits, while ensuring quality control throughout the production process. The Templars' wine producing estates in France, particularly in the Champagne and Burgundy regions, demonstrated their understanding of viticulture and their ability to produce premium products for both religious and commercial purposes. The Order's vineyards employed advanced techniques, such as selective grafting, systematic pruning, and controlled fermentation that produced wines of exceptional quality. Templar wine served a liturgical functions within the Order while generating substantial revenues through sales to secular customers who valued the reputation for purity and quality associated with monastic production. The urban properties controlled by the Templars throughout Europe provided additional sources of revenue, while establishing the order as a significant force in medieval commercial development. The Templar quarter in Paris, centered around the massive temple complex that served as the order's European headquarters, included residential properties, commercial buildings, workshops, and markets that generated substantial rental income. The order's urban holdings typically occupied strategic locations near ports, major roads, or commercial centers that maximized their value and rental potential. The Paris Temple evolved into one of medieval Europe's most important financial centers, rivaling the commercial districts of Italian city-states in terms of the volume and sophistication of transactions conducted within its walls. The complex included secure vaults for storing precious metals and valuables, counting houses where international currency exchanges were calculated and recorded, and meeting rooms where major commercial agreements were negotiated and finalized. The Templars' reputation for absolute security made the Paris Temple the preferred location for storing the treasures of French royalty and major noble houses. The order's role as royal treasurers began during the reign of Louis VIII of France, who entrusted the Templars with managing royal finances during his participation in the Second Crusade. The practical advantages of employing the Templars for this purpose included their proven expertise in financial management, their international network that facilitated transactions across Europe, and their religious vows that theoretically prevented them from embezzling royal funds. The success of this initial arrangement led to the Templars becoming permanent managers of French royal finances, a responsibility that would continue for over a century. The management of royal treasures required the Templars to develop sophisticated accounting systems that tracked revenues from multiple sources, managed expenditures for various governmental functions, and maintained accurate records that could be audited by royal officials. The order's financial administrators compiled detailed ledgers recording tax collections, feudal obligations, judicial fines, and other sources of royal income. Their systematic approach to financial record-keeping established standards for governmental accounting that influenced administrative practices throughout medieval Europe. The Templars' treasury operations extended beyond simple storage and record-keeping to include active management of royal finances aimed at maximizing revenues and minimizing costs. The order's financial experts negotiated favorable exchange rates for international transactions, coordinated the collection of taxes and feudal obligations, and advised royal officials on financial policies that would optimize governmental revenues. Their expertise in currency markets and international commerce provided valuable insights that helped French monarchs navigate the complex financial challenges of medieval governance. The physical security measures employed at Templar treasury facilities represented the most advanced protective systems available in medieval Europe. The Paris Temple's vaults featured massive stone construction with walls several feet thick, multiple locked doors secured with complex key systems, and guard posts that maintained constant surveillance. The order's military training and discipline ensured that treasury personnel possessed both the financial expertise necessary for their duties and the combat skills required to defend their facilities against potential attackers. The Templars' involvement in currency production and monetary policy reflected their deep understanding of medieval economic systems and their influence on governmental financial policies. The order operated mints at several locations, producing coins that met standardized weight and purity specifications essential for maintaining confidence in monetary systems. Their expertise in metallurgy and quality control helped establish uniform standards for precious metal content that facilitated international commerce and reduced disputes over currency values. The international scope of Templar financial operations created unprecedented opportunities for arbitrage and currency speculation that generated substantial profits for the order. Templar treasurers monitored exchange rates across multiple markets and identified opportunities to profit from regional variations in currency values. Their ability to transfer funds rapidly between different locations allowed them to take advantage of temporary price discrepancies while providing valuable services to merchants and governmental authorities requiring international financial transactions. The Order's financial innovations extended to the development of insurance services that protected merchants and travelers against the various risks associated with medieval commerce. Templar insurance policies covered losses due to shipwreck, banditry, political confiscation, and other hazards that threatened commercial ventures. The premiums charged for these services reflected careful calculations of risk probabilities based on extensive historical data maintained by the Order's financial administrators. These early insurance operations established precedents that would later influence the development of modern insurance industries. The complexity of Templar financial operations required the recruitment and training of personnel with specialized skills in mathematics, languages, law, and international commerce. The Order established training programs that produce financial experts capable of managing complex transactions, negotiating commercial agreements, and maintaining the detailed records necessary for international banking operations. These educational initiatives contributed to the broader development of commercial expertise throughout medieval Europe and helped establish the intellectual foundations for the later emergence of Renaissance banking houses. The sophisticated financial empire that the Templars had constructed throughout Europe and the Mediterranean faced its gravest challenge in the summer of 1187, when the political and military situation in the Holy Land deteriorated with alarming speed. Saladin's methodical consolidation of Muslim territories surrounding the Crusader states had created an unprecedented threat to Christian control over Palestine and Syria. Unlike previous Muslim leaders who had focused primarily on regional objectives, Saladin possessed both the strategic vision and military resources necessary to launch a coordinated campaign aimed at eliminating the Crusader presence entirely. His diplomatic skills had unified previously fractious Muslim territories under a single command structure, while his reputation for honorable conduct had attracted veteran warriors from across the Islamic world to serve in his armies. The Kingdom of Jerusalem's internal political divisions provided Saladin with opportunities that previous Muslim leaders had been unable to exploit. The regency crisis following King Baldwin's death in 1185 had created competing factions within the Christian nobility, each pursuing different strategies for dealing with the growing Muslim threat. The hawkish party led by Ronald of Chatillon and Gerard de Ridefort, the newly elected Grand Master of the Knights Templar, advocated aggressive military action designed to disrupt Saladin's preparations through preemptive strikes. The moderate faction headed by Raymond of Tripoli and Balian of Ebelin preferred diplomatic solutions that might preserve Christian territories through negotiated settlements rather than risking everything in decisive battles against superior enemy forces. Gerard de Ridefort's elevation to the position of Granum in 1185 marked a significant shift in Templar leadership philosophy and military strategy. Unlike his predecessors, who had typically emphasized defensive operations and careful resource management, de Ridefort possessed an aggressive temperament that favored bold offensive actions regardless of strategic risks. His personal animosity towards Raymond of Tripoli, stemming from a dispute over marriage arrangements that had cost a reed for a potentially lucrative alliance, influenced his political alignment with the war party and contributed to the factional divisions that weakened Christian unity at this critical moment. The series of provocations that ultimately triggered Saladin's invasion began with Rield of Shashan's attacks on Muslim merchant caravans traveling between Egypt and Damascus. These raids launched from his fortress at Kerak violated existing truces and provided Saladin with legitimate justification for military retaliation. The Templar support for Reynolds' aggressive policies reflected their institutional commitment to offensive operations against Muslim territories, but also demonstrated a dangerous miscalculation of the strategic balance that had shifted decisively in Saladin's favor during the previous decade. The mobilization of Christian forces in response to Saladin's invasion preparations revealed the extent to which factional divisions had compromised military effectiveness. King Gear of Lusignan's authority remained contested by significant portions of the nobility, while the military orders pursued partially independent strategies that reflected their institutional priorities rather than coordinated defensive planning. The Templars contributed approximately 300 knights and 2,000 sergeants to the royal army, representing nearly their entire available military strength in the Holy Land. This massive commitment demonstrated their recognition of the existential threat posed by Saladin's campaign, but also left their numerous fortifications dangerously undermanned. The Christian army that assembled at Sephoria in early July 1187 represented the largest military force that the Crusader states had ever fielded, numbering approximately 20,000 men, including knights, sergeants, infantry, and supporting personnel. However, the logistical challenges of maintaining such a large force in the Arab-Palestinian interior during summer created vulnerabilities that Saladin's strategic planning had anticipated. The army's dependence on water supplies from a limited number of sources, combined with a need to transport provisions across hostile territory, created opportunities for the type of strategic manipulation that characterized Saladin's military genius. Saladin's siege of Tiberias, beginning on July 2nd, 1187, represented a calculated provocation designed to force the Christian army into disadvantageous battle conditions. The city's strategic importance as a major population center and its symbolic significance as the seat of Raymond of Tripoli created political pressures that made it difficult for the Christian leadership to ignore the attack. However, the fortress's location near the Sea of Galilee, approximately 16 miles from the Christian army's position at Sephoria, required a march across waterless terrain that would exhaust the heavily armored knights and leave them vulnerable to the type of mobile tactics that Saladin's forces had perfected. Raymond of Tripoli's advice to avoid the march to Tiberias reflected his intimate knowledge of local conditions and his realistic assessment of Christian military capabilities relative to Saladin's forces. His argument that Tiberias could be recaptured later after Saladin's army had been weakened by the logistical challenges of maintaining a large force in hostile territory demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking that prioritized long-term survival over short-term territorial losses. However, his counsel was undermined by accusations of cowardice and possible treachery from Gerard d'Arreport and other members of the war party. The fatal decision to march toward Tiberias on July 3rd, 1187 resulted from a combination of political pressure, military miscalculation, and Gerard de Ridderfort's persuasive arguments that aggressive action represented the only honorable response to Saladin's challenge. The Grand Master's influence over King Guy, combined with the support of other prominent nobles who feared that inaction would be interpreted as weakness, overcame the strategic objections raised by more experienced military commanders. This decision would prove catastrophic, not only for the immediate campaign, but for the entire future of the Crusader states. The march from Sephoria began before dawn in an attempt to cover as much distance as possible during the cooler morning hours. The army moved in 3 divisions with the Templars forming the vanguard, the royal forces occupying the center, and the Hospitallers protecting the rear. The infantry, including crossbowmen and spearmen essential for protecting the cavalry against Muslim-mounted archers, struggled to maintain the pace required for reaching water sources before the heat became unbearable. The heavily armored knights, wearing mail werks and carrying shields, lances, and swords, faced the additional burden of controlling their war horses while maintaining formation across increasingly difficult terrain. Saladin's harassment tactics began almost immediately as the Christian column departed Sephoria. Muslim-mounted archers operating in small groups that could strike quickly and withdraw before retaliation targeted the flanks and rear of the Christian formation with continuous volleys of arrows. These attacks, while individually causing relatively few casualties, created constant psychological pressure and forced the Christians to maintain defensive formations that slowed their advance. The cumulative effect of hundreds of minor wounds combined with the stress of constant alertness and the physical demands of marching in armor during summer heat gradually degraded the combat effectiveness of the entire army. The decision to halt the march at Mare Scalia, still several miles short of the vital water sources at Hayden, sealed the army's fate and demonstrated the extent to which Saladin's strategic planning had anticipated Christian responses. The location offered minimal defensive advantages and no access to water, leaving the Christian forces exposed to continued harassment throughout the night while their condition deteriorated rapidly. The psychological impact of spending the night listening to Muslim war cries and religious chants, combined with the physical torment of extreme thirst, created conditions that made effective military action virtually impossible. The Battle of Hattin began at dawn on July 4th, 1187, with Saladin's forces launching coordinated attacks from multiple directions against the demoralized and exhausted Christian army. The Muslims had spent the night in relative comfort near water sources while their enemies suffered from thirst, fatigue, and the constant stress of expecting attack. The initial Muslim assault focused on separating the Christian infantry from their cavalry support, recognizing that the crossbowmen and spearmen provided essential protection against mounted archers and needed to be neutralized before the decisive cavalry engagement could begin. The Christian infantry, composed primarily of Syrian and Palestinian Christians, familiar with local conditions, broke formation early in the battle and fled toward the nearby village of Hattin in desperate search of water. Their abandonment of the battlefield eliminated the protective screen that had allowed Christian heavy cavalry to operate effectively against Muslim mounted archers in previous engagements. The Knights found themselves isolated and vulnerable to the type of harassment tactics that had proven so effective during the previous day's march. Gerard de Ford's attempts to maintain Templar discipline and coordinate effective counterattacks demonstrated individual courage, but proved tactically futile given the deteriorating strategic situation. The Grand Master led several charges against Muslim formations, attempting to break through their lines and reach water sources that might allow the Christian army to recover its fighting capacity. However, these desperate attacks were easily avoided by Muslim cavalry trained in mobile warfare, while the energy expenditure further weakened Knights already suffering from severe danger, hydration, and exhaustion. The collapse of Christian resistance occurred with shocking rapidity once their formation integrity was compromised. King's capture, along with the relic of the true cross that had accompanied the army as a symbol of divine protection, created panic that spread throughout the remaining Christian forces. The psychological impact of losing both temporal and spiritual leadership simultaneously proved devastating to morale and eliminated any possibility of organized resistance to Saladin's final assault. The aftermath of Hayden witnessed scenes of unprecedented carnage and religious fanaticism that reflected the intensity of Muslim anger over decades of Christian occupation. Saladin's normally restrained approach to prisoner treatment gave way to systematic execution of captured Templars and Hospitallers, whom he viewed as the most dangerous enemies of Islam due to their permanent commitment to warfare against Muslim territories. The mass beheading of approximately 200 captured members of the military orders, conducted by volunteer religious scholars and Sufi mystics, demonstrated the depth of religious hatred that the Crusader presence had generated throughout the Islamic world. Gerard Delaporte's survival among the captured Templars created controversy that would plague his reputation for the remainder of his life. While most of his brother knights faced immediate execution, the Grand Master was spared and eventually ransomed, leading to accusations that he had purchased his life through promises to surrender Templar fortifications. These allegations, while never conclusively proven, reflected the broader demoralization that followed the catastrophic defeat and the desperate search for explanations that might assign blame for the disaster. The strategic consequences of Hayton extended far beyond the immediate battlefield losses and created a cascade of territorial collapses that eliminated most Christian holdings in Palestine within months. Saladin's methodical campaign to reduce Crusader fortifications proceeded with remarkable efficiency as demoralized garrisons surrendered rather than face hopeless sieges without prospect of relief. The fall of major cities including Acre, Jaffa, Beirut, and Sidon demonstrated the extent to which Christian control had depended on the field army destroyed at Hayton. Jerusalem's surrender on October 2nd, 1187 marked the symbolic culmination of Saladin's campaign and eliminated the primary justification for the Crusader state's existence. The city's capture, achieved through negotiation rather than assault, reflected Saladin's political sophistication and his understanding that magnanimous treatment of Christian civilians would enhance his reputation throughout Europe while reducing the likelihood of future crusading expeditions. The terms of surrender, which allowed Christian residents to ransom themselves or face enslavement, demonstrated a restraint that contrasted sharply with the massacre that had accompanied the First Crusade's capture of the city. The news of Jerusalem's fall reached Europe through multiple channels, creating shock waves that reverberated throughout the highest levels of secular and ecclesiastical authority. Pope Gregory VI's immediate proclamation of the Third Crusade reflected the Vatican's recognition that the loss of Christianity's most sacred sites required an unprecedented response involving the major monarchs of Western Europe. The papal bull added a tremendi issued in October 1187 offered extensive spiritual rewards for participation in the new crusading expedition while imposing severe penalties on those who failed to support the holy war through military service or financial contributions. The recruitment efforts for the Third Crusade demonstrated both the continued appeal of crusading ideology and the practical difficulties of organizing massive military expeditions across vast distances. Emperor Frederick Barbarossa's decision to lead a German army overland through the Byzantine Empire and Anatolia reflected his extensive military experience and confidence in his ability to overcome the logistical challenges that had defeated previous expeditions. However, his death by drowning in the Salif River in June 1190 eliminated German participation and demonstrated the persistent dangers facing crusading armies, regardless of their leadership quality or preparation. King Philip Augustus of France and King Richard I of England's joint decision to travel by sea to the Holy Land reflected lessons learned from previous overland expeditions while creating new opportunities for cooperation and conflict between the two monarchs. Their winter sun in Sicily during 1190 to 1191 allowed for extensive planning and preparation, but also revealed the personal and political tensions that would complicate their collaboration once they reached the Holy Land. Richard's conquest of Cyprus during the spring of 1191 provided the crusading expedition with a valuable forward base, while demonstrating his military capabilities and strategic understanding of Mediterranean logistics. The siege of Acre, which had begun in August 1189 under the leadership of Gu of Lusignan and Conrad of Montat, evolved into the largest and most complex military operation of the Third Crusade. The city's strategic importance as the primary port connecting the Crusader estates with Europe made its recapture essential for any meaningful restoration of Christian power in the Holy Land. However, the fortress's sophisticated defenses combined with Saladin's ability to maintain a relief army in the surrounding hills created a prolonged stalemate that tested the endurance and resources of both sides. The Templars' participation in the Acre siege demonstrated their continued military effectiveness despite the catastrophic losses suffered at Hayton. The order had managed to rebuild its strength through recruitment from Europe and the redeployment of forces from their extensive network of fortifications in other regions. Their expertise in siege warfare, including the construction and operation of massive stone-throwing engines, proved invaluable during the complex operations required to breach Acre's walls. The order's financial resources drawn from their European commanderies helped sustain the prolonged siege through the purchase of supplies and the payment of mercenary troops. King Richard's arrival at Acre in June 1191 transformed the strategic situation and provided the military leadership necessary to bring the siege to a successful conclusion. His reputation as a warrior king, combined with his extensive resources and proven tactical abilities, reinvigorated Christian morale while creating new pressures on Saladin's defensive strategy. The Liony Heart's systematic approach to siege warfare, including the deployment of advanced military engineering techniques and coordinated assault tactics, demonstrated the evolution of European military capabilities since the disaster at Hayton. The fall of Acre on July 12, 1191 represented the first major Christian victory since Saladin's conquest of Jerusalem and provided a foundation for potential restoration of Crusader power in Palestine. The city's recapture eliminated the Muslim naval base that had threatened Christian supply lines while providing a secure port for receiving reinforcements and supplies from Europe. However, the massacre of approximately 2,700 Muslim prisoners ordered by Richard I following disputes over the terms of surrender demonstrated the continued brutality of crusading warfare and created additional obstacles to potential diplomatic solutions. The Third Crusade subsequent campaigns revealed both the possibilities and limitations of European military intervention in the Holy Land during the late 12th century. Richard's victories at Arsu and Jaffa demonstrated that disciplined Christian armies could still defeat Saladin's forces under favorable conditions. While his inability to recapture Jerusalem reflected the strategic realities that made permanent conquest impossible without massive long-term commitments of resources and personnel. The Treaty of Jaffa, concluded in September 1192, established a compromise settlement that restored limited Christian control over coastal territories while acknowledging Muslim sovereignty over the interior regions, including Jerusalem. The Templars' adaptation to the reduced territorial scope of the Crusader states required significant modifications to their strategic priorities and operational methods. The Order's traditional focus on controlling major fortifications and maintaining large cavalry forces proved less relevant in the coastal enclaves that remained under Christian control after 1192. Instead, the Templars increasingly emphasized naval operations, commercial activities, and diplomatic relations with Muslim neighbors as means of preserving their influence and advancing Christian interests through non-military methods. The construction of Castle Pilgrim, beginning in 1218, represented the Templars' most ambitious architectural project during the 13th century and demonstrated their continued commitment to maintaining a military presence in the Holy Land. Despite the reduced scope of Christian territories, the fortress's innovative design incorporated lessons learned from previous siege warfare, while taking advantage of natural defensive features that made it virtually impregnable to contemporary military technology. The castle's massive walls rising directly from the Mediterranean shoreline created a stronghold that could be supplied by sea even during extended land-based sieges. The Templars' involvement in the Fifth Crusade reflected their institutional obligation to support papal crusading initiatives while revealing the limitations of military solutions to the strategic challenges facing the remaining Crusader states. The expedition's focus on conquering Egypt as a means of pressuring Muslim forces in Palestine demonstrated sophisticated strategic thinking, but ultimately failed due to logistical difficulties and the Nile River's annual flooding patterns. The Templars' participation in the Siege of Damietta showcased their continued military capabilities, while the expedition's ultimate failure highlighted the declining effectiveness of large-scale crusading operations. Emperor Frederick II's diplomatic success in negotiating the temporary restoration of Jerusalem to Christian control through the Treaty of Jaffa in 1229 created complex political challenges for the military orders, who found their traditional role as defenders of the Holy City complicated by the emperor's excommunication and the disputed legitimacy of his agreements with Muslim authorities. The Templars' refusal to participate in Frederick's ceremonial entry into Jerusalem reflected their loyalty to papal authority while creating tensions with secular rulers who viewed such independence as threatening to royal prerogatives. The gradual erosion of Crusader territories during the mid-3th century proceeded through a combination of military pressure, diplomatic isolation, and internal political divisions that the military orders proved unable to prevent despite their continued military effectiveness. The Mongol invasions that devastated Muslim territories in the 1240s and 1250s created temporary opportunities for Christian expansion. But the Templars and other military orders lacked sufficient resources to capitalize on these developments without substantial European support that was not forthcoming. The fall of Antioch to the Mamluk Sultan Bibars in 1268 eliminated the northernmost Crusader state and demonstrated the systematic nature of Muslim efforts to eliminate the remaining Christian presence in the Levant. The city's capture, achieved through a combination of siege warfare and internal treachery, revealed the vulnerability of even the most heavily fortified Christian positions when faced with determined and well-resourced Muslim armies. The massacre of the city's Christian population sent clear signals regarding Muslim intentions and eliminated any possibility of negotiated settlements that might preserve Christian territories. The Templars' final major fortress at Seft fell to Bibars in 1266 after a siege that demonstrated both the order's continued military prowess and the ultimate futility of defensive strategies that could not be sustained indefinitely without external support. The castle's sophisticated fortifications, including multiple concentric walls and innovative defensive technologies, delayed its capture for several weeks, but could not overcome the fundamental disadvantage created by the attackers' superior numbers and resources. The execution of the fortress's Templar garrison following its surrender reflected the increasingly uncompromising nature of the conflict during its final phases. The siege of Acre beginning in April 1291 represented the culmination of the Mamluk campaign to eliminate the Crusader states and created the final test of Templar military capabilities under desperate conditions. The city's defenses, strengthened through decades of continuous improvement, included massive walls, numerous towers, and sophisticated defensive systems that had previously withstood multiple siege attempts. However, the attacking army commanded by Sultan Al-Ashraf Khalil possessed both the numerical superiority and advanced siege equipment necessary to overcome even the most formidable fortifications. The Templars' defense of Acre demonstrated their continued adherence to the military principles that had characterized their order throughout its existence, including absolute commitment to their mission, regardless of personal cost, and refusal to surrender, even when facing hopeless odds. Grandmaster William de Boyer's death during the final assault on May 18th, 1291 symbolized both the order's military courage and the end of their original purpose as defenders of Christian territories in the Holy Land. The fall of Acre eliminated the last significant Crusader stronghold and marked the definitive end of European colonial presence in the Eastern Mediterranean that had persisted for nearly 2 centuries. The evacuation of surviving Templars and other Christian refugees to Cyprus represented a strategic retreat rather than complete defeat, as the order maintained substantial resources and military capabilities that could potentially support future attempts to restore Christian control over Palestinian territories. However, the loss of their original territorial base created fundamental challenges to the Templars' institutional identity and purpose that would prove increasingly difficult to resolve during the subsequent decades. The Order's transformation from territorial defenders to a military organization without a clear mission created vulnerabilities that their enemies would eventually exploit with devastating effectiveness. The evacuation from Acre in 1291 marked not merely the end of the Templars' military mission in the Holy Land, but the beginning of a far more insidious campaign against their very existence. As the last Templar ships departed the smoking ruins of the Crusader states, carrying with them the accumulated wealth, archives, and bitter memories of 2 centuries of warfare, they sailed toward a Europe that viewed their return with increasing suspicion and barely concealed resentment. The order that had once embodied the highest ideals of Christian knighthood now found itself cast as an anachronism, a relic of failed crusading dreams whose continued existence served as an uncomfortable reminder of Christendom's inability to maintain its foothold in the Holy Land. The transformation of European attitudes toward the military orders reflected broader changes in medieval society that had accelerated during the 13th century. The rise of centralized monarchies, the growth of urban commercial centers, and the emergence of professional armies had diminished the traditional role of feudal military elites. Kings increasingly preferred to employ mercenary companies whose loyalty could be purchased and whose services could be terminated when no longer needed, rather than dealing with autonomous military orders whose independence and papal protection made them difficult to control. The Templars' vast network of fortified commanderies, their exemption from royal taxation, and their direct relationship with the papacy created a parallel power structure that monarchs viewed as increasingly intolerable. The European nobility's resentment toward Templar wealth and privileges had been building for decades before the fall of Acre provided a catalyst for more direct action. The order's agricultural estates, managed with systematic efficiency that often surpassed the productivity of neighboring secular properties, generated revenues that allowed them to purchase additional lands and expand their influence at the expense of traditional noble families. Templar agricultural innovations, including advanced crop rotation systems and selective livestock breeding programs, created competitive advantages that threatened the economic foundations of feudal society. Local nobles found themselves unable to match Templar productivity levels while simultaneously being excluded from the lucrative commercial networks that the order had established throughout Europe. The church hierarchy's growing ambivalence toward the military orders reflected theological developments that questioned the compatibility of monastic vows with military service. The emergence of mendicant orders such as the Franciscans and Dominicans, who emphasized poverty, preaching, and pastoral care over military activities, provided alternative models for religious life that appeared more consistent with gospel teachings. Influential theologians began arguing that the Templars' accumulation of wealth and their involvement in commercial activities contradicted the spiritual principles that supposedly justified their existence. The order's failure to prevent the loss of the Holy Land raised fundamental questions about divine approval for their mission and suggested that their military approach had been fundamentally flawed. The secular clergy's hostility toward Templar privileges intensified as competition for tithes and donations became more acute during the economic difficulties of the late 13th century. Parish priests and bishops resented the order's exemption from paying tithes while maintaining their right to collect such payments from others within their territories. The Templars' ability to provide religious services through their own chaplain, conduct marriages and funerals, and offer burial in consecrated ground created direct competition with local churches for the spiritual allegiance and financial support of Christian populations. These privileges, originally granted to facilitate the order's mission in the Holy Land, appeared increasingly unjustified once that mission had ended in failure. Urban populations, particularly in the growing commercial centers of Northern Europe, viewed the Templars with suspicion that reflected broader social tensions between traditional feudal elites and emerging merchant classes. The order's extensive urban properties, their control over strategic commercial locations, and their involvement in banking and international trade created conflicts with municipal authorities seeking to expand their own economic influence. Templar houses in major cities often occupied prime real estate that could have generated substantial tax revenues for municipal governments. while their tax-exempt status meant that the burden of supporting royal and local administration fell more heavily on other residents. The intellectual climate of the early 14th century provided additional ammunition for critics of the military orders through the revival of classical learning and the emergence of more sophisticated theological scholarship. Universitated clerics, trained in Aristotelian logic and familiar with patristic literature, developed more nuanced critiques of crusading ideology and the institutional structures it had created. The scholastic emphasis on rational analysis and systematic theology exposed contradictions within Templar ideology that had been overlooked during the enthusiastic early decades of the crusading movement. Academic debates about the legitimacy of religious warfare and the proper relationship between spiritual and temporal authority created intellectual frameworks that undermined traditional justifications for the military or its existence. Philip IV of France's accession to the throne in 1285 brought to power a monarch whose financial difficulties and political ambitions would prove catastrophic for the Templars. The young king inherited a realm facing severe economic pressures created by decades of warfare against England, Flanders, and various rebellious vassals. The costs of maintaining professional armies, constructing and garrisoning fortifications, and supporting and expanding royal administration had strained French royal finances to the breaking point. Traditional sources of revenue, including feudal obligations and agricultural taxes, proved insufficient to meet the growing demands of centralized government and continuous military operations. Philip's financial crisis deepened throughout the 1290s as his military commitments expanded and his sources of revenue failed to keep pace with expenditures. The king's wars in Gascony against English forces, his campaigns in Flanders against rebellious cloth-producing cities, and his conflicts with various French nobles required enormous expenditures for mercenary troops, siege equipment, and logistical support. The development of more sophisticated military technology, including improved crossbows, early gunpowder weapons, and advanced fortification techniques, increased the costs of warfare far beyond what previous generations of monarchs had faced. Philip's attempts to fund these operations through increased taxation met with fierce resistance from nobles, clergy, and urban populations already struggling with economic difficulties. The debasement of French currency, implemented repeatedly during Philip's reign as a desperate expedient to generate additional revenue, created inflation that undermined confidence in royal financial management, while failing to provide sustainable solutions to the underlying fiscal crisis. The manipulation of silver and gold content in French coins generated short-term profits for the royal treasury, but created long-term economic instability that damaged commercial confidence and reduced the real value of tax collections. Merchants and foreign traders began demanding payment in more stable currencies, while domestic population suffered from rising prices that reduced their standard of living and their ability to pay additional taxes. Philip's conflicts with Pope Boniface VIII over taxation of church property demonstrated both his willingness to challenge traditional ecclesiastical privileges and his desperate need for additional sources of revenue. The king's assertion that royal authority extended to church lands and personnel within French territories represented a fundamental challenge to papal supremacy that reflected broader trends toward monarchical centralization throughout Europe. However, the practical motivation behind these theoretical disputes remained Philip's urgent need to access the substantial wealth controlled by religious institutions within his realm. The church's vast land holdings accumulated over centuries through donations and careful management represented the largest concentration of untaxed wealth available to support royal finances. The resolution of the papal conflict through Boniface's death and the election of the French-influenced Pope Clement V in 1305 provided Philip with unprecedented opportunities to pursue his financial objectives through ecclesiastical channels. Clement's decision to establish the papal court at Avignon rather than Rome, placed the papacy under direct French influence and eliminated the primary obstacle to royal interference in church affairs. The new pope's dependence on French protection and his personal connections to French noble families created conditions that would prove essential for Philip's subsequent campaign against the Templars. The propaganda campaign that preceded the attack on the Templars began with carefully orchestrated rumors and accusations designed to undermine public confidence in the order's religious orthodoxy and moral integrity. Philip's agents, working through networks of royal officials, court chroniclers, and sympathetic clergy, disseminated stories alleging that Templar initiation ceremonies involved blasphemous rituals, denial of Christ, and sexual enterprise that violated both religious and secular law. These accusations, while lacking credible evidence, exploited popular suspicions about the secretive nature of Templar activities and the order's reputation for independence from normal ecclesiastical oversight. The specific charges leveled against the Templars reflected a sophisticated understanding of contemporary religious anxieties and legal procedures that would facilitate their prosecution under existing canonical and civil law. Accusations of heresy, including denial of Christ's divinity and desecration of the crucifix, provided grounds for ecclesiastical prosecution while justifying the confiscation of church property. Allegations of sodomy and other sexual crimes created additional legal justifications for royal intervention while appealing to popular prejudices about monastic corruption. The inclusion of charges related to idol worship and magical practices exploited widespread fears about occult activities while providing dramatic elements that would capture public attention and generate support for suppressive action. The coordination between Philip's propagandists and sympathetic religious authorities ensured that accusations against the Templars received widespread circulation through official church channels, as well as secular networks. Sermons delivered in parish churches throughout France began incorporating references to Templar corruption and the need for ecclesiastical reform. While university theologians were encouraged to develop scholarly critiques of military orders and their theological foundations, the systematic nature of this campaign, involving multiple levels of French society and various types of authority figures, created an atmosphere of suspicion and hostility that would prove essential for justifying the dramatic actions that followed. The recruitment of witnesses willing to testify against the Templars required careful selection of individuals whose personal grievances or financial difficulties made them susceptible to royal pressure and inducements. Former Templars who had been expelled from an order for disciplinary violations provided particularly valuable testimony, as their insider knowledge lent credibility to their accusations, while their personal resentments motivated cooperation with royal investigators. Secular clergy who'd been involved in disputes with local Templar commanderies over tithes, burial rites, or other ecclesiastical privileges offered additional sources of hostile testimony that appeared to confirm patterns of Templar arrogance and disregard for proper religious authority. The legal framework for prosecuting the Templars required careful coordination between civil and ecclesiastical authorities to ensure that proceedings appeared legitimate while achieving the desired outcome of complete suppression and asset confiscation. Philip's legal advisors developed procedural approaches that exploited ambiguities in canonical law regarding the prosecution of religious orders while maintaining the appearance of proper judicial process. The involvement of the Inquisition, with its specialized expertise in heresy trials and its established procedures for extracting confessions through torture, provided the technical mechanisms necessary for generating the evidence required to justify suppressive action. Pope Clement F's initial resistance to Philip's demands for action against the Templars reflected both his awareness of the political motivations behind the accusations and his concern about the precedent that would be established by allowing secular authorities to suppress religious orders without proper ecclesiastical review. However, the Pope's vulnerable position at Avignon, surrounded by French territory and dependent on royal protection, severely limited his ability to to resist Philip's pressure. The gradual erosion of papal independence through a series of compromises and concessions created the conditions necessary for the ultimate betrayal of the Templars' traditional papal protection. The secret negotiations between Philip and Clement during 1306 and early 1307 established the framework for coordinated action that would ensure the Templars' complete destruction while maintaining the appearance of proper legal procedure. The agreements reached during these discussions allocated responsibility for different aspects of the suppression campaign, with Philip taking primary responsibility for arrests and interrogations, while Clement provided the ecclesiastical authority necessary to justify confiscation of Templar properties. The careful timing and coordination of these arrangements demonstrated the sophisticated planning that preceded the dramatic events of October 1307. The intelligence networks that Philip's agents had established within Templar commander throughout France provided detailed information about the order's personnel, resources, and daily routines that would prove essential for the success of the coordinated arrests. Royal spies, often recruited from among Templar servants or disgruntled former members, provided regular reports about the movements of key officials, the locations of important documents and treasures, and the defensive capabilities of various Templar installations. This systematic surveillance operation conducted over several years ensured that royal forces would be able to neutralize Templar resistance quickly and efficiently when the moment for action arrived. The financial calculations that motivated Philip's campaign against the Templars involved detailed assessments of the order's wealth that had been compiled through years of careful observation and investigation. Royal accountants estimated that Templar assets within French territories included hundreds of agricultural estates, dozens of urban properties, substantial quantities of precious metals and jewels, and extensive commercial investments that together represented wealth comparable to the annual revenues of several kingdoms. The potential for confiscating these resources provided powerful motivation for pursuing the risky strategy of challenging papal authority and confronting one of medieval Europe's most formidable military organizations. The timing of the final assault on the Templars reflected Philip's assessment that political and military conditions had aligned to provide the best possible opportunity for success. The order's demoralization following the loss of the Holy Land, the absence of strong papal leadership, and the general European exhaustion with crusading ideology created circumstances that reduced the likelihood of effective resistance or international intervention. The king's calculation that other European monarchs would ultimately support his actions, either through active cooperation or passive acquiescence, proved largely accurate and ensured that the Templars would face their ultimate crisis in isolation, abandoned by the secular and ecclesiastical authorities that had once guaranteed their protection and independence. The carefully orchestrated machinery of destruction that Philip IV had spent years constructing reached its moment of activation in the pre-dawn darkness of Friday, October 13th, 1307. Across the length and breadth of France, royal bailiffs and sergeants moved with synchronized precision toward Templar commanderies, their sealed orders bearing the unmistakable authority of the crown. The king's instructions, distributed under absolute secrecy, just days before commanded the simultaneous arrest of every template within French territories, from the humblest sergeant brother maintaining horses in remote rural preceptories to Grandmaster Jacques de Molay himself, who'd been residing as an honored guest at the royal court in Paris. The element of surprise proved devastating in its effectiveness. At the temple in Paris, where Demel had spent the previous evening dining with royal officials and discussing potential new crusading expeditions, armed men surrounded the complex before the brothers had completed their dawn prayers. The massive fortress that had served as the Order's European headquarters for over a century, with its imposing stone walls and defensive towers, offered no protection against enemies who arrived bearing royal warrants and ecclesiastical authorization. The Templars' military training honed through decades of warfare against Muslim enemies proved useless against an assault that relied on legal authority rather than force of arms. The systematic nature of the arrests demonstrated the extraordinary intelligence gathering operation that Philip's agents had conducted throughout the preceding years. Royal forces arrived at each Templar installation equipped with detailed lists of personnel, precise knowledge of building layouts, and specific instructions regarding the location of the important documents and treasures. At Pays, the order's symbolic birthplace, sergeants seized not only the resident brothers, but also the extensive archives containing records of the order's earliest activities and the personal correspondence of few deals. Similar scenes unfolded at commanderies throughout Champagne, Normandy, Burgundy, and the other regions where Templar influence had been strongest. The accusations formally presented against the arrested Templars revealed the sophisticated legal strategy that Philip's advisors had developed to ensure maximum impact while maintaining procedural legitimacy. The primary charges centered on heretical practices allegedly performed during secret initiation ceremonies, including the denial of Christ's divinity, spitting upon the crucifix, and the worship of a mysterious idol called Baphomet. Additional allegations encompass sexual improprieties between brothers, the practice of magical arts, and various forms of blasphemy that violated both canonical and civil law. These accusations, while lacking credible evidence, exploited contemporary anxieties about religious orthodoxy and monastic corruption while providing legal justifications for the confiscation of Templar properties. The detailed nature of the heresy charges reflected careful study of previous ecclesiastical trials and the specific legal requirements for prosecuting religious orders. The accusation that Templars denied Christ during initiation ceremony struck at the fundamental basis of Christian faith, while providing grounds for treating the entire order as a heretical organization rather than merely a corrupt institution requiring reform. The allegations regarding the worship of Baphomet, described as a bearded head or demonic figure, incorporated elements of popular superstition about occult practices, while suggesting connections to Islamic beliefs that would resonate with audiences familiar with crusading propaganda. The charges of sexual misconduct between brothers exploited widespread suspicions about monastic communities while providing additional legal grounds for prosecution under secular law. Medieval legal systems treated sodomy as both a religious sin and a civil crime punishable by death, making these accusations particularly damaging to the Templars' reputation and legal standing. The systematic nature of these allegations, presented as integral parts of Templar initiation rituals rather than isolated incidents of individual corruption, suggested institutional depravity that required complete suppression rather than limited reform. The role of the Inquisition in the subsequent trials provided the technical expertise and legal authority necessary for extracting the confessions required to justify Philip's actions. The Dominican and Franciscan inquisitors assigned to interrogate captured Templars brought decades of experience in heresy prosecution and sophisticated understanding of the psychological and physical techniques required to break the resistance of determined prisoners. Their involvement lent ecclesiastical legitimacy to proceedings that might otherwise have appeared as purely secular persecution motivated by financial considerations. Gumdiri, the chief inquisitor of France and Philip's confessor, assumed primary responsibility for coordinating the interrogation process and ensuring that sufficient evidence was generated to support the charges against the order. His personal loyalty to the king, combined with his professional expertise in extracting confessions from heretics, made him ideally suited for managing the complex legal and political challenges involved in prosecuting such a prominent religious organization. The Inquisitor's previous experience with trials of alleged heretics, including members of various mystical sects and accused practitioners of magical arts, provided valuable precedents for the procedures employed against the Templars. The systematic application of torture to extract confessions from arrested Templars represented one of the most controversial aspects of the entire prosecution. The techniques employed by royal interrogators included the strapardo, which involved suspending prisoners by their arms, tied behind their backs until joints dislocated, the application of heated metal implements to feet and other sensitive areas, and various forms of crushing devices that gradually increase pressure on limbs until bones fractured. These methods, while legally sanctioned under contemporary inquisitorial procedures, were applied with unusual intensity and persistence to overcome the military discipline and religious conviction that characterized most Templar prisoners. The physical evidence of torture's effects became apparent during subsequent hearings when witnesses appeared with visible injuries, missing digits, and permanent disabilities resulting from their interrogations. Brother Bernard Detto testified that his feet had been burned so severely that bones fell out of them during his torture, while others described similar mutilations that left them permanently crippled. The systematic nature of these injuries documented in official records despite their obvious implications for the validity of resulting confessions demonstrated the determination of Philip's agents to extract admissions regardless of the methods required. The responses to Philip's campaign varied dramatically across different European kingdoms, reflecting the complex political relationships and competing interests that characterized medieval diplomacy. King Edward III of England initially resisted French pressure to arrest Templars within his territories, arguing that the accusations appeared politically motivated and lacked sufficient evidence to justify such drastic action. The English king's reluctance reflected both his kingdom's traditional rivalry with France and his personal relationships with prominent English Templars who had served his father during the Scottish campaigns. The eventual English arrest conducted in January 1308 after months of French diplomatic pressure and papal intervention proceeded with considerably less violence and systematic torture than had characterized the French operations. English interrogators, lacking the specialized expertise of French inquisitors and operating under different legal traditions, proved less effective at extracting confessions from Templar prisoners. The resulting testimonies, while including some admissions of wrongdoing, lacked the dramatic details and systematic consistency that characterized French confessions, suggesting either different interrogation methods or genuine differences in Templar practices between the two kingdoms. German territories presented additional complications due to the fragmented nature of the Holy Roman Empire and the competing jurisdictions of various princes, bishops, and municipal authorities. Emperor Henry VII's initial support for the Templars reflected both his political rivalry with France and his practical need for military support in his ongoing Italian campaigns. However, papal pressure and the gradual accumulation of testimony from other regions eventually forced German authorities to initiate their own investigations, though these proceeded with considerably less enthusiasm and effectiveness than in France. The Iberian Peninsula's response to the Templar crisis reflected the unique political and military circumstances that characterized the ongoing Reconquista campaigns against Muslim territories. The kings of Castile, Aragon, and Portugal recognized that the military orders provided essential services in frontier warfare that could not easily be replaced by secular forces. King James I of Aragon's protection of Templars within his territories, combined with his negotiations to transfer Templar properties to other military orders rather than confiscating them for royal use, demonstrated a pragmatic approach that prioritized military effectiveness over political conformity with French policies. Jacques de Mol's initial response to his arrest and interrogation revealed the psychological impact of betrayal by authorities who had previously treated him as an honored ally. The Grand Master, who'd spent his final months of freedom as a guest at the royal court and had participated in planning discussions for potential new crusading expeditions, appeared genuinely shocked by the accusations leveled against his order. His initial confession, extracted after several days of interrogation and possibly torture, included admissions that he had denied Christ and spat upon the crucifix during his own initiation ceremony decades earlier. The specific details of Demmel's confession reflected either genuine memories of initiation practices or carefully coached testimony designed to provide the most damaging possible admissions. His statement that he'd been forced to deny Christ 3 times while kissing the base of the cross provided dramatic parallels to Peter's denial of Jesus during the crucifixion narrative, creating powerful symbolic resonance that enhanced the propaganda value of his testimony. The Grand Master's additional admissions regarding the worship of an idol and the practice of sexual improprieties between brothers provided comprehensive confirmation of the major charges against the order. The subsequent recantation of his confession by Demmelay in December 1307 created significant complications for Philip's legal strategy and demonstrated the continuing resistance that many Templars maintained despite the physical and psychological pressures of their imprisonment. The Grand Master's public declaration that his earlier admissions had been extracted through torture and threats, delivered before a gathering of university masters and other prominent witnesses in Paris, challenged the validity of the entire prosecution while inspiring other imprisoned Templars to withdraw their own confessions. The testimonies of other high-ranking Templars reveal the complex dynamics of resistance and collaboration that characterize the Order's response to persecution. Geoffroy de Chagny, preceptor of Normandy and one of the Order's most respected military commanders, initially confessed to various charges, but later joined Demel in recounting his admissions. His detailed descriptions of torture methods employed by royal interrogators, including the application of heated implements to his feet until flesh separated from bone, provided specific evidence of the coercive methods used to extract confessions. Huda Perot, the Order's Visitor General and third-ranking official, adopted a different strategy by maintaining his confessions while attempting to minimize their implications. His testimony acknowledged participation in some of the alleged rituals, while arguing that they represented traditional practices that had lost their original meaning rather than genuine heretical beliefs. This approach, while avoiding the additional persecution that typically followed recantation, failed to provide the Order with effective defense against the fundamental charges of institutional heresy. The varying responses of Templar officials to interrogation reflected both individual differences in personality and conviction and the different treatment they received from their captors. Those who maintained their confessions often received better prison conditions and treatment, while those who recanted faced renewed torture and harsher confinement. The systematic nature of these differential treatments suggested deliberate policies designed to encourage cooperation while punishing resistance. The broader European response to the Templar trials revealed the complex interplay of political, religious, and economic factors that influence royal and ecclesiastical decision-making throughout the continent. The initial skepticism expressed by many rulers regarding the validity of French accusations gradually gave way to reluctant cooperation as papal pressure intensified and the political costs of opposing the campaign became apparent. However, the methods employed in different kingdoms varied significantly, reflecting local legal traditions, political circumstances, and the relative strength of Templar organizations in different regions. The Italian investigations conducted under direct papal supervision due to the proximity of the Aveynon court produced mixed results that reflected the complex political situation within the peninsula. The Papal States' own investigations yielded relatively few confessions despite the direct involvement of papal inquisitors, while the various city-states and kingdoms pursued different approaches based on their individual relationships with France and their assessment of local political advantages. The overall pattern suggested that the most dramatic confessions and evidence of Templar guilt emerged primarily from regions where French political influence was strongest and where royal authorities had the greatest motivation to support Philip's campaign. The accumulation of testimony from across Europe created a complex legal and political situation that would ultimately determine the fate of the Templar Order. The French confessions, extracted through systematic torture and coercion, provided the most comprehensive and damaging evidence against the Templars, while investigations in other regions produced more ambiguous results that could be interpreted either as confirmation of French findings or as evidence that Templar practices varied significantly between different provinces. The challenge facing ecclesiastical authorities involved reconciling these contradictory testimonies while maintaining the appearance of objective legal proceedings that would justify whatever ultimate decision was reached regarding the order's fate. The mounting pressure from Philip's relentless campaign and the accumulating testimonies extracted through torture across European kingdoms placed Pope Clement V in an increasingly precarious position by early 1312. The pontiff found himself caught between his personal knowledge of the questionable methods used to generate evidence against the Templars and the overwhelming political reality that resistance to French demands had become virtually impossible. The papal court at Avignon, surrounded by French territory and dependent on royal protection for its very survival, provided no sanctuary from Philip's influence. The king's agents maintained constant surveillance of papal activities while his diplomats applied continuous pressure through a combination of threats, inducements, and carefully orchestrated demonstrations of popular support for the anti-Templar campaign. The theological justifications that Clement's advisors developed for suppressing the Templars without formal conviction of heresy reflected sophisticated canonical reasoning designed to satisfy legal requirements while achieving the desired political outcome, rather than declaring the order formally heretical, which would have required definitive proof of doctrinal error. The papal bull focused on the scandal and suspicion that had rendered the Templars ineffective for their original mission. This approach allowed the Pope to avoid making definitive judgments about the truth of specific accusations, while acknowledging that the order's reputation had been so thoroughly compromised that continued existence would serve no useful purpose. The drafting of Vox in Excelso required months of careful preparation as papal lawyers worked to construct legal arguments that would withstand scrutiny from canonical experts throughout Europe. The document's language emphasized the practical impossibility of clearing the Templars' reputation given the widespread nature of accusations and the extensive testimony that had been gathered against them. By focusing on the order's inability to fulfill its mission rather than definitive proof of guilt, the bull avoided the more stringent evidentiary requirements that would have applied to formal heresy convictions while still providing sufficient justification for complete suppression. The Council of Vienne, convened in October 1311, provided the ecclesiastical forum necessary for legitimizing the Pope's decision, while creating the appearance of broader church consensus regarding the Templars' fate. The selection of participants reflected careful political calculation, with French bishops and abbots comprising a substantial portion of the assembly, while potential opponents of suppression found themselves excluded through various administrative obstacles. The council's location in the Dauphiné, technically within the Holy Roman Empire, but practically under French influence, ensured that proceedings would occur in an environment favorable to Philip's objectives. The debates that occurred during the council sessions reveal the genuine divisions within the church hierarchy regarding the appropriate response to the Templar crisis. A significant minority of prelates led by several Italian bishops and representatives from regions where Templar investigations had produced less damaging evidence argued for continued investigation rather than immediate suppression. These voices contended that the contradictory nature of testimonies from different regions, combined with evidence of coercive interrogation methods, created a reasonable doubt about the validity of accusations against the order. They proposed comprehensive reform of Templar governance and practices as an alternative to complete dissolution. The reform proposals presented at Vienne included detailed recommendations for restructuring the military orders under direct papal supervision, eliminating their financial independence, and subjecting their activities to regular episcopal oversight. Proponents of this approach argued that the Templars' military expertise and international network remained valuable assets for potential future crusading expeditions, while their accumulated wealth could support other religious purposes if properly administered. These suggestions reflected genuine concern about the precedent that would be established by allowing secular authorities to destroy religious orders through accusations that had not been definitively proven. Cardinal Napoleon Orsini's impassioned defense of the Templars during the council proceedings represented the most articulate opposition to suppression and demonstrated the continuing resistance that existed within the church hierarchy despite overwhelming political pressure. The cardinal's arguments emphasized the procedural irregularities that had characterized the investigations, the obvious political motivations behind Philip's campaign, and the dangerous precedent that would be established if religious orders could be destroyed through secular persecution supported by questionable ecclesiastical authorization. His detailed analysis of the evidence presented against the Templars highlighted numerous inconsistencies and contradictions that cast doubt on the reliability of confessions extracted through torture. The systematic rebuttal of reform proposals by supporters of suppression revealed the extent to which political considerations had come to dominate theological and canonical reasoning. French bishops and their allies argued that the scandal surrounding the Templars had become so extensive and deeply rooted that no amount of reform could restore public confidence in the order. They contended that continued existence of the Templars, even under modified governance structures, would perpetuate doubts about church integrity and provide ongoing opportunities for critics to question ecclesiastical authority. The practical impossibility of distinguishing between guilty and innocent members within a corrupted institution required complete dissolution as the only effective solution. Pope Clement's personal intervention in the council debates, delivered through a carefully orchestrated address that emphasizes papal authority to make final decisions regarding religious orders, effectively ended meaningful discussion of alternatives to suppression. The pontiff's speech combined expressions of personal anguish over the necessity of destroying an order that had served the church for 2 centuries with firm declarations that the evidence of scandal made continuation impossible. His emphasis on the practical challenges of reforming an institution whose reputation had been so thoroughly compromised provided the theological framework that wavering council members needed to justify their acquiescence to suppression. The formal promulgation of Vox in Excelso on March 22, 1312 marked the official end of the Knights Templar as a recognized religious order within the Catholic Church. The bull's language carefully avoided definitive declarations of heresy, while emphasizing the practical impossibility of the order's continuation given the extensive accusations and widespread loss of public confidence. The document's legal reasoning focused on administrative necessity rather than theological condemnation, allowing the Pope to suppress the Templars without formally endorsing the validity of specific charges that had been leveled against them. The immediate practical consequences of the dissolution bull extended far beyond the simple termination of the Templars' legal existence as a religious order. The document's provisions for handling Templar properties, personnel, and ongoing legal obligations created complex administrative challenges that would require years to resolve completely. The bull's directive that Templar assets should be transferred to other religious purposes specifically to support continued crusading efforts established general principles, while leaving specific implementation details to be worked out through subsequent negotiations between ecclesiastical and secular authorities. The companion bull ad provided issued on May 2nd, 1312 addressed the crucial question of asset distribution by formally transferring most Templar properties to the Knights Hospitaller. This decision reflected both practical considerations regarding which organization possessed the infrastructure necessary to manage such extensive holdings and political calculations about which solution would prove most acceptable to the various European monarchs who had participated in the suppression campaign. The Hospitallers' established presence throughout Europe, combined with their continued military activities in Rhodes and other Mediterranean locations, made them the logical inheritors of the Templars' crusading mission and resources. The complex negotiations required to implement the property transfer revealed the extent to which secular authorities had already begun treating Templar assets as potential sources of royal revenue, rather than ecclesiastical property subject to church control. Philip IV's insistence that substantial portions of French Templar holdings should be retained by the crown to compensate for the costs of investigation and imprisonment created precedents that other monarchs quickly adopted. King Edward III of England, King James of Aragon, and various German princes all advanced similar claims for compensation that significantly reduced the assets actually transferred to the Hospitallers. The administrative challenges involved in cataloging and transferring Templar properties demonstrated the extraordinary scope of the order's accumulated wealth and the complexity of their financial operations. Royal commissioners appointed to inventory Templar assets discovered extensive networks of agricultural estates, urban properties, commercial investments, and financial instruments that spanned multiple kingdoms and involved relationships with hundreds of different individuals and institutions. The meticulous records that Templar administrators had maintained throughout their existence provided detailed documentation of these holdings. But the sheer volume of information required months of careful analysis to compile comprehensive inventories. The resistance offered by some Templar commanderies to the implementation of dissolution orders created additional complications that required careful diplomatic and sometimes military intervention. Several fortified Templar installations, particularly in remote regions where royal authority was weak, refused to acknowledge the validity of suppression orders and attempted to maintain independent operations. The siege of Miravet in Aragon, which lasted for over a year before the Templar garrison finally surrendered, demonstrated the military capabilities that some segments of the order retained despite their official dissolution. Similar resistance occurred at various locations throughout Europe, requiring coordinated efforts by secular and ecclesiastical authorities to enforce the Pope's directives. The fate of individual Templars following the order's dissolution varied dramatically depending on their location, their role within the organization, and their responses to the accusations that have been leveled against them. Those who had confessed to heretical practices and expressed repentance were typically assigned to other religious orders or allowed to live as hermits under episcopal supervision. The pensions provided for these former Templars drawn from the revenues of their former properties offered modest but adequate support for basic subsistence while ensuring their continued oversight by church authorities. The treatment of Templars who had maintained their innocence or recanted earlier confessions proved considerably harsher, reflecting both the political necessity of validating the suppression campaign and the practical challenges of managing individuals whose continued protests threatened to undermine the official narrative. Many of these unrepentant Templars faced indefinite imprisonment under harsh conditions, while others were subjected to renewed interrogation designed to extract the admissions necessary to justify their earlier treatment. The systematic nature of these punitive measures demonstrated the determination of secular and ecclesiastical authorities to prevent the emergence of organized resistance to their actions. Jacques de Mol's situation as the former Grand Master created unique challenges that required careful political management to avoid creating a martyr whose continued existence might inspire ongoing opposition to the suppression. The aging knight's imprisonment in Paris under royal custody placed him at the center of continuing diplomatic negotiations between French and papal authorities regarding the appropriate final disposition of the Templars' former leadership. His intermittent recantations and reaffirmations of earlier confessions, possibly reflecting the psychological effects of prolonged imprisonment and torture, created uncertainty about his ultimate fate that persisted for nearly 2 years following the order's formal dissolution. Jeef de Chauny's parallel imprisonment alongside Demel reflected the special attention that authorities devoted to the Templar senior leadership, whose testimonies had provided crucial support for the suppression campaign. The former preceptor of Normandy's military reputation and his detailed knowledge of Templar operations throughout France made him a particularly valuable witness whose cooperation remained essential for validating the accusations that had justified the order's destruction. His treatment during imprisonment, while harsh, avoided the extreme measures that might have prompted renewed recantations that could have undermined the official narrative. The broader European response to the Templars' dissolution revealed the complex interplay of political, economic, and religious factors that had influenced the entire suppression campaign. Monarchs who had initially resisted French pressure to arrest Templars within their territories now competed to claim the largest possible shares of former Templar assets while expressing support for the papal decision to eliminate the order. This transformation reflected both the practical benefits that rulers derived from confiscating Templar properties and their recognition that continued opposition to the suppression would prove politically costly and ultimately futile. The establishment of new administrative structures to manage former Templar properties created opportunities for royal officials to expand their influence while generating revenues that helped address the chronic financial difficulties that had motivated much of the anti-TLA campaign. The appointment of royal commissioners to oversee property transfers, collect revenues, and manage ongoing legal obligations provided numerous positions for loyal administrators, while ensuring that substantial portions of Templar wealth would ultimately benefit secular rather than ecclesiastical authorities. These arrangements, while technically temporary pending final resolution of property disputes, often became permanent features of royal administration. The propaganda efforts that accompanied the implementation of dissolution orders emphasized the necessity and justice of the Church's decision, while minimizing discussion of the methods that had been employed to generate evidence against the Templars. Official chronicles and royal proclamations portrayed the suppression as a triumph of Orthodox Christianity over heretical corruption, while carefully avoiding detailed examination of the torture and coercion that had characterized the investigation process. This narrative framework, supported by systematic censorship of dissenting voices, established the historical interpretation that would dominate European understanding of the Templar suppression for centuries. The long-term consequences of the Templars' destruction extended far beyond the immediate redistribution of their assets and affected fundamental relationships between secular and ecclesiastical authority throughout medieval Europe. The precedent established by Philip's successful challenge to papal protection of religious orders encouraged other monarchs to pursue similar campaigns against institutions whose independence and wealth made them attractive targets for royal appropriation. The demonstrated effectiveness of heresy accusations as tools for eliminating inconvenient religious organizations provided a template that would be employed repeatedly during subsequent centuries, as centralized monarchies sought to consolidate their control over church resources within their territories. The formal dissolution of the Knights Templar through papal decree created a complex mosaic of survival, adaptation, and transformation across medieval Europe that defied the neat administrative categories envisioned by Pope Clement V and King Philip IV. While the official narrative proclaimed the complete elimination of the order, the reality proved far messier with former Templars, their accumulated knowledge, and their extensive networks finding new channels of expression that would influence European development for generations. The geographical fragmentation of responses to the suppression orders created a patchwork of outcomes that reflected local political conditions, economic necessities, and the varying degrees of enthusiasm with which different rulers embraced the campaign against the military orders. In Portugal, King Dinu's demonstrated remarkable political acumen by transforming potential disaster into strategic opportunity through the creation of the Order of Christ in 1319. rather than simply confiscating Templar properties for royal use. As had occurred in France and England, the Portuguese monarch negotiated with papal authorities to establish a new military order that would inherit both the assets and the mission of the suppressed Templars. This arrangement satisfied the Church's requirement that former Templar properties continue to serve religious and military purposes while providing Portugal with a reformed institution capable of supporting the kingdom's expanding maritime ambitions and ongoing conflicts with Muslim territories in North Africa. The transition from Templars to the Order of Christ involved careful screening of personnel to eliminate individuals whose association with the suppressed order might compromise the new organization's reputation. Former Templars who had maintained their innocence and demonstrated loyalty to Orthodox Christian doctrine found themselves welcomed into the Reformed order, while those whose testimonies had supported the heresy charges faced exclusion or assignment to conventional monastic houses. This selective integration preserved valuable military expertise and administrative knowledge, while distancing the new order from the scandals that had destroyed its predecessor. The Order of Christ's subsequent role in Portuguese exploration and colonial expansion demonstrated the enduring value of the organizational structures and accumulated knowledge that had characterized the Templars. The Reformed Order's financial resources derived from extensive agricultural estates and commercial investments inherited from the Templars provided crucial funding for Prince Henry the Navigator's expeditions along the African coast. The navigational expertise and maritime technology that Templar networks had developed through their Mediterranean operations found new application in Atlantic exploration, contributing to Portuguese discoveries that would reshape global commerce and establish the foundations of European colonial empires. Scotland's response to the Templar oppression reflected the kingdom's unique political situation as an independent realm engaged in ongoing warfare with England and maintaining complex relationships with both French and papal authorities. King Robert the Bruce's excommunication following his coronation in 1306 had placed Scotland outside normal ecclesiastical jurisdiction, creating opportunities for former Templars to find sanctuary beyond the reach of inquisitorial persecution. The absence of systematic investigation into Scottish Templar activities, combined with the kingdom's desperate need for experienced military personnel during the Wars of Independence, created conditions that allowed substantial numbers of former Templars to continue their activities under different organizational arrangements. The integration of former Templars into Scottish military operations proceeded through informal networks that avoided the institutional structures that had made the order vulnerable to systematic suppression. Individual knights and sergeants found service with various noble houses, bringing their specialized knowledge of siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and military engineering to support Scottish resistance against English occupation. The legendary association of Templars with Robert the Bruce's victory at Bannockburn in 1314, while lacking definitive historical documentation, reflected the broader pattern of former Templars contributing their expertise to Scottish military efforts during this crucial period. The establishment of Templar-influenced Masonic lodges in Scotland during the 14th century created alternative institutional frameworks for preserving and transmitting the order's accumulated knowledge and traditions. These organizations, while adopting the symbolic language and ritualistic practices of medieval craft guilds, incorporated elements of Templar ideology and organizational structure that maintained continuity with the suppressed order. The emphasis on secrecy, mutual assistance, and the preservation of ancient wisdom that characterized early Scottish Masonry reflected the practical necessities facing former Templars seeking to maintain their identity while avoiding persecution. The survival of Templar structures in the Holy Roman Empire demonstrated the complex interplay between imperial politics, local autonomy, and ecclesiastical authority that characterized medieval German territories. The fragmented nature of imperial administration, combined with competing jurisdictions between various princes, bishops, and municipal authorities created numerous opportunities for former Templars to find protection under rulers who valued their military expertise more than papal approval. The ongoing conflicts between the empire and various enemies, including Hungarian invasions, Ottoman expansion, and internal rebellions, maintained demand for the specialized military knowledge that former Templars possessed. The transformation of Templar properties in German territories proceeded through a variety of arrangements that reflected local political conditions and the relative strength of different authorities. Some former Templar commanderies were transferred to the Teutonic Knights, whose focus on Baltic expansion made them logical inheritors of military responsibilities in frontier regions. Others passed to local bishops or secular nobles who assumed responsibility for maintaining the military and religious functions that the Templars had previously provided. The diversity of these arrangements created a complex mosaic of institutional continuity that preserved many aspects of Templar organization while adapting them to new political realities. The absorption of Templar properties, knowledge, and traditions by the Knights Hospitaller represented the most systematic attempt to preserve the institutional legacy of the suppressed order within officially sanctioned frameworks. The hospital's receipt of substantial Templar assets throughout Europe provided them with unprecedented resources for expanding their operations, while creating obligations to maintain the military and charitable functions that had justified the original grants. However, the practical challenges of integrating two distinct organizational cultures, managing vastly expanded territories, and reconciling different operational priorities created significant tensions within the enlarged hospital organization. The hospital's efforts to absorb former Templar personnel revealed fundamental differences in organizational philosophy and operational methods that complicated the integration process. The hospital's traditional emphasis on medical care and charitable activities contrasted with the Templars' focus on military operations and financial services, creating conflicts over resource allocation and institutional priorities. Former Templars who joined the Hospitallers often found themselves assigned to roles that failed to utilize their specialized expertise. While hospital traditions clashed with Templar practices in areas ranging from daily religious observances to military tactics, the administrative challenges involved in managing the expanded hospital organization required significant modifications to existing governance structures and operational procedures. The integration of Templar commanderies into the hospital network created redundancies in some regions, while leaving gaps in others, necessitating comprehensive reorganization of territorial divisions and administrative hierarchies. The different record-keeping systems, financial practices, and legal traditions that characterize the two orders required careful harmonization to prevent confusion and ensure effective management of the combined organization's extensive resources. The preservation of Templar knowledge within hospital archives created valuable repositories of information regarding military engineering, financial administration, and international commerce that would influence European development for centuries. Templar innovations in banking practices, including letters of credit and currency exchange systems, found new applications within hospital operations while spreading to other commercial networks throughout Europe. The architectural expertise that had produced the massive Templar fortifications in the Holy Land influenced hospital construction projects in Rhodes, Malta, and other Mediterranean locations where the order established new bases following the loss of the Crusader states. The emergence of merchant guilds as inheritors of Templar commercial networks reflected the broader transformation of European economic structures during the 14th century. The suppression of the Templars created opportunities for secular commercial organizations to assume control of trade routes, banking relationships, and financial instruments that the military order had developed. Italian banking houses, Flemish cloth merchants, and German trading companies expanded their operations into territories and markets that had previously been dominated by Templar commercial activities, adapting and improving upon the financial innovations that the order had pioneered. The Medici Bank's adoption of Templar banking practices demonstrated the enduring value of the financial techniques that the military order had developed during its centuries of operation. The letters of credit, currency exchange systems, and international transfer mechanisms that had facilitated template operations found new applications within the expanding networks of Renaissance banking houses. The systematic record-keeping practices and risk assessment procedures that had characterized Templar financial administration influenced the development of modern accounting methods and commercial law throughout Europe. The Hanseatic League's expansion into territories formerly controlled by Templar commercial networks illustrated the broader redistribution of economic power that followed the order's suppression. The German Trading Confederation's systematic approach to establishing merchant communities, negotiating commercial privileges, and maintaining international trade relationships reflected lessons learned from Templar organizational methods. The League's emphasis on mutual assistance, standardized practices, and collective security echoed many aspects of Templar organization while adapting them to the specific requirements of merchant communities rather than military orders. The immediate aftermath of Templar suppression created significant disruptions in European political and financial systems that required years to resolve completely. The sudden elimination of one of medieval Europe's most important financial institutions created liquidity crises that affected monarchs, merchants, and religious organizations throughout the continent. The complex web of loans, deposits, and commercial relationships that had centered on Templar commanders required careful untangling to prevent widespread economic collapse. While the redistribution of Templar assets created new opportunities for corruption and conflict among competing claimants, King Philip's financial situation, ironically, failed to improve substantially despite his successful appropriation of Templar wealth within French territories. The costs of conducting the suppression campaign, including the maintenance of extensive surveillance networks, the employment of specialized interrogators, and the administrative expenses of managing confiscated properties, consumed substantial portions of the resources that the king had hoped to gain. The resistance offered by other European monarchs to French demands for shared profits from Templar confiscations further limited the financial benefits that Philip derived from his campaign against the order. The broader implications for church-state relations extended far beyond the immediate circumstances of the Templar suppression and established precedents that would influence European political development for centuries. Philip's successful challenge to papal protection of religious orders demonstrated that secular authorities possessed practical means of overriding ecclesiastical privileges when political and economic incentives were sufficiently strong. The techniques employed in the anti-Templar campaign, including the systematic use of torture to extract confessions, the coordination of propaganda efforts across multiple kingdoms, and the manipulation of legal procedures to achieve predetermined outcomes provided templates for subsequent attacks on religious institutions whose independence conflicted with royal ambitions. The papacy's capitulation to French pressure during the Templar crisis revealed the extent to which the Church's spiritual authority had become subordinated to political considerations during the Avignon period. Pope Clement V's willingness to sacrifice a religious order that had served the Church faithfully for 2 centuries in order to maintain his position and protect papal interests established dangerous precedents regarding the reliability of ecclesiastical protection for religious institutions. The systematic suppression of dissenting voices within the Church hierarchy during the Templar trials demonstrated the effectiveness of political pressure in silencing opposition to controversial papal decisions. The transformation of former Templar properties into sources of royal revenue accelerated the development of centralized administrative systems throughout Europe while providing monarchs with resources necessary for expanding their military and bureaucratic capabilities. The systematic cataloging of template assets required the development of new record-keeping systems and administrative procedures that influenced the evolution of governmental bureaucracy. The appointment of royal commissioners to manage former Templar properties created numerous positions for loyal administrators, while establishing precedents for royal intervention in ecclesiastical affairs that would prove valuable in future conflicts between secular and religious authorities. The dispersion of former Templars throughout Europe created networks of individuals whose shared experiences and specialized knowledge influenced military, commercial, and intellectual development in ways that are difficult to trace, but nonetheless significant. The veterans of Templar military operations brought their expertise in siege warfare, cavalry tactics, and fortification design to new employers throughout the continent, contributing to the evolution of medieval military technology and strategy. The former administrators of Templar financial networks applied their knowledge of international commerce, currency exchange, and credit systems to new commercial ventures that expanded European economic capabilities. The preservation of Templar traditions within alternative institutional frameworks ensured that many aspects of the order's organizational culture and accumulated knowledge survived the official suppression to influence subsequent European development in ways that extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of their dissolution. The systematic innovations in banking, military organization, and international commerce that had characterized Templar operations during their 2 centuries of existence established foundational principles that would shape European civilization throughout the Renaissance and into the modern era. Their development of standardized accounting practices, international letters of credit, and sophisticated currency exchange systems provided the technical infrastructure upon which Italian banking houses built their commercial empires, while their organizational methods influenced the structure of merchant guilds, craft associations, and emerging professional corporations across the continent. The Templars' revolutionary approach to military logistics and supply chain management established precedents that influenced European warfare long after their suppression. Their systematic methods for provisioning armies across vast distances, maintaining equipment standardization, and coordinating complex operations involving multiple units had demonstrated possibilities for military organization that secular commanders gradually adopted and refined. The professional military ethos that the Templars had pioneered, emphasizing discipline, training, and institutional loyalty over individual glory-seeking, provided models for the standing armies that European monarchs began establishing during the 15th and 16th centuries. Their innovations in siege warfare, including advanced engineering techniques and coordinated assault tactics, influenced the development of artillery-based warfare that would dominate European battlefields during the Renaissance. The architectural legacy of Templar construction projects extended beyond their famous circular churches and massive fortifications to encompass innovations in engineering, construction management, and urban planning that influenced European development for centuries. Their systematic approach to fortress design, incorporating multiple defensive layers, sophisticated water management systems, and provisions for extended sieges, established standards that military engineers continue to reference well into the gunpowder era. The Templars' urban properties and major commercial centers had demonstrated possibilities for integrated development that combined residential, commercial, and administrative functions within carefully planned complexes, providing models for the urban renewal projects that transformed European cities during the Renaissance. The financial innovations that the Templars had developed to support their international operations provided the foundation for the complex banking systems that emerged during the 14th and 15th centuries. Their letters of credit, which had allowed pilgrims to deposit funds in one location and withdraw equivalent amounts at distant destinations, evolved into the sophisticated international exchange systems that facilitated Renaissance commerce. The risk assessment procedures that Templar treasurers had developed for evaluating loans and commercial ventures influenced the emergence of insurance markets and actuarial science. Their systematic record-keeping practices established standards for commercial documentation that became fundamental to European business law and accounting procedures. The emergence of Templar legends during the centuries following their suppression reflected both genuine historical memories and the creative elaboration of storytellers seeking to explain the order's dramatic rise and fall. The transformation of the Templars from historical military order into legendary guardians of ancient secrets began almost immediately after their dissolution, as popular imagination struggled to reconcile the official narrative of heretical corruption with widespread knowledge of their previous reputation for piety and military prowess. The secrecy that had necessarily surrounded their financial operations and diplomatic activities provided fertile ground for speculation about hidden knowledge and mysterious practices that had supposedly enabled their extraordinary success. The association of the Templars with the Holy Grail emerged during the 14th century through the confluence of Arthurian romance literature and popular fascination with the order's mysterious rituals and alleged heretical practices. Medieval authors drawing upon fragmentary knowledge of temple ceremonies and their documented connection to Jerusalem's sacred sites began incorporating the military order into existing Grail narratives as the secret guardians of Christianity's most precious relic. The Templars' historical role as protectors of pilgrims traveling to holy sites provided plausible historical foundation for stories depicting them as custodians of sacred objects. While their sudden suppression explained why such treasures had subsequently vanished from historical record, the development of Grail mythology involving the Templars reflected broader medieval literary traditions that sought to reconcile Christian theology with pre-Christian Celtic and Germanic folklore. The Templars' documented presence at sites throughout Europe that had previously held religious significance in pagan traditions provided connections that medieval authors exploited to create complex narratives linking Christian relics with ancient wisdom traditions. Their association with Solomon's Temple in Jerusalem, combined with medieval legends about the biblical king's magical powers and hidden treasures, created additional layers of mystical significance that enriched the developing mythology surrounding the order. The geographical dispersion of former Templars following their suppression contributed to the spread of legends and traditions that associated the order with various local sites and phenomena throughout Europe. Former Templar properties, abandoned or transferred to other organizations, became focal points for stories about hidden treasures, secret passages, and mysterious rituals that had supposedly been conducted within their walls. The distinctive architectural features of Templar churches and commanderies, particularly their circular designs and symbolic decorations, provided visual evidence that seemed to support claims about the order's involvement in esoteric practices and ancient wisdom traditions. The Renaissance revival of classical learning and the emergence of humanist scholarship created new contexts for interpreting Templar history that emphasized their role as preservers and transmitters of ancient knowledge. Scholars familiar with Greek and Roman texts began speculating about connections between Templar practices and classical mystery religions, while the rediscovery of Hermetic and alchemical texts suggested possible links between the military order and esoteric philosophical traditions. The Templars' documented involvement in international commerce and their extensive networks throughout the Mediterranean world provided plausible foundations for theories about their role in preserving and disseminating knowledge from classical antiquity and the Islamic world. The Protestant Reformation's challenge to Catholic authority created additional opportunities for reinterpreting Templar history in ways that portrayed the order as early opponents of papal corruption rather than heretical deviants deserving suppression. Protestant historians seeking historical precedents for resistance to Catholic authority began presenting the Templars as victims of papal greed and political manipulation rather than genuine heretics. This revisionist interpretation emphasized the questionable methods used to extract confessions from Templar prisoners while minimizing discussion of the specific accusations that had been leveled against the order. The transformation of the Templars from heretical criminals into martyred reformers reflected broader Protestant efforts to identify historical precedents for their own opposition to Catholic authority. The emergence of Freemasonry during the 17th and 18th centuries provided new institutional frameworks for preserving and developing Templar traditions that had survived the order's official suppression. Early Masonic lodges, particularly in Scotland and France, incorporated elements of Templar symbolism, ritual practices, and organizational structure while adapting them to the specific requirements of craft guilds and philosophical societies. The emphasis on secrecy, mutual assistance, and the preservation of ancient wisdom that characterized Masonic organizations reflected genuine continuities with Templar traditions while serving practical purposes for groups seeking to maintain independence from political and religious authorities. The development of Scottish Rite Masonry during the 18th century created elaborate degree systems that explicitly incorporated Templar history and symbolism into their ritual practices and philosophical teachings. The Knights Templar degree, which became one of the most prestigious levels within Masonic hierarchies, presented detailed narratives about the order's history while emphasizing themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and the preservation of sacred traditions. These Masonic interpretations of Templar history, while historically questionable in many specific details, maintained genuine connections to medieval traditions, while adapting them to Enlightenment philosophical frameworks that emphasized reason, tolerance, and human progress. The Romantic movement of the late 18th and early 19th centuries created new cultural contexts for appreciating medieval history that portrayed the Templars as embodiment of chivalry ideals and spiritual devotion rather than corrupt heretics deserving suppression. Romantic authors and artists fascinated by medieval architecture, literature, and social institutions began presenting the Templars as noble warriors whose dedication to Christian principles had made them victims of political persecution and ecclesiastical corruption. This romanticized interpretation emphasized the order's military prowess, architectural achievements, and charitable activities while minimizing discussion of the accusations that had led to their suppression. So, Walter Scott's novel Ivanhoe, published in 1820, played a crucial role in establishing popular perceptions of the Templars that would influence European and American culture throughout the 19th century. Scott's portrayal of Templar knights as proud, disciplined warriors whose religious devotion had been corrupted by worldly ambitions provided a nuanced interpretation that acknowledged both their historical achievements and their ultimate failure. The novel's detailed descriptions of template ceremonies, military practices, and architectural settings created vivid images that shaped popular understanding of medieval knighthood while establishing literary precedents for subsequent fictional treatments of the order. The 19th century's growing interest in historical scholarship and archaeological investigation provided new opportunities for serious study of Templar history that sought to separate factual evidence from legendary elaborations. Historians such as Charles Addison and Thomas Kite Lay conducted systematic research into medieval documents and architectural remains to reconstruct accurate accounts of Templar activities and organization. Their work demonstrated the order's genuine historical significance, while challenging many of the more fantastic claims that had accumulated around their memory during previous centuries. However, the limited availability of primary sources and the continuing influence of Romantic interpretations meant that scholarly understanding of Templar history remained incomplete and often speculative. The emergence of modern nationalism during the 19th century created new context for interpreting Templar history that emphasized the order's contributions to specific national traditions rather than their international character. French historians presented the Templars as embodiment of French chivalric ideals whose suppression had been motivated by foreign political interference. While English scholars emphasized their role in developing English legal and financial institutions, German researchers focused on Templar contributions to military technology and organizational methods, while Portuguese historians celebrated their transformation into the Order of Christ and their subsequent role in maritime exploration. These nationalist interpretations, while often historically questionable, reflected genuine pride in Templar achievements while serving contemporary political purposes. The 20th century's world wars and social upheavals created new contexts for understanding Templar history that emphasized themes of loyalty, sacrifice, and resistance to persecution. The Order's commitment to defending Christian territories against overwhelming odds resonated with populations facing their own existential challenges, while their systematic suppression by political authorities provided historical parallels for contemporary experiences of persecution and resistance. Military organizations, resistance movements, and various political groups adopted Templar symbols and rhetoric to express their own commitment to defending civilization against barbarism and corruption. The development of modern mass media during the 20th century provided new channels for disseminating Templar legends and creating popular interpretations of their history that reached unprecedented audiences. Hollywood films, television programs, and popular literature presented dramatic narratives about Templar adventures, mysteries, and conspiracies that combined historical elements with contemporary entertainment values. These popular treatments, while often historically inaccurate, maintained public interest in Templar history, while creating new layers of mythology that influenced popular understanding of medieval history and religious traditions. Dan Brown's novel, The Da Vinci Code, published in 2003, represented the culmination of centuries of legendary development surrounding the Templars, while demonstrating the continuing appeal of conspiracy theories involving the Order. Brown's narrative, which portrayed the Templars as guardians of explosive secrets about early Christianity and the true nature of Jesus Christ, combined elements from various historical and pseudo-historical sources to create a complex conspiracy theory that captured international attention. The novel's massive commercial success demonstrated the enduring fascination with Templar mysteries, while creating new popular interpretations that often conflicted with historical evidence. The scholarly response to popular Templar mythology has emphasized the importance of distinguishing between documented historical facts and speculative theories that lack credible evidence. Modern historians have access to extensive archives of medieval documents that provide detailed information about Templar activities, organization, and suppression, allowing for more accurate reconstruction of their actual history than was possible during previous centuries. Archaeological investigations of former Templar sites have revealed valuable information about their architectural practices, daily life, and economic activities, while debunking many claims about secret chambers, hidden treasures, and mysterious symbols. Contemporary academic researchers demonstrated that the historical Templars, while certainly remarkable in their achievements and influence, were fundamentally a product of their medieval context rather than guardians of ancient secrets or revolutionary conspirators. Their banking innovations reflected practical responses to the logistical challenges of supporting military operations across vast distances rather than esoteric knowledge derived from mysterious sources. Their architectural achievements demonstrated sophisticated engineering skills and substantial financial resources rather than hidden symbolic meanings or occult practices. Their suppression resulted from political and economic factors rather than their possession of dangerous secrets that threatened established authorities. The modern revival of interest in Templar history has created opportunities for serious historical scholarship, while also generating new forms of pseudo-historical speculation that continue to blur the boundaries between fact and fiction. Legitimate historical societies and academic institutions have produced valuable research that has significantly expanded understanding of medieval military orders and their role in European development. However, popular culture continues to generate new conspiracy theories and mystical interpretations that often contradict established historical evidence, while appealing to contemporary audiences seeking alternatives to conventional religious and political narratives. The establishment of modern organizations claiming Templar descent or inspiration reflects both genuine interest in medieval history and contemporary desires for exclusive membership in prestigious institutions. Various Masonic bodies, chivalry orders, and fraternal organizations have adopted Templar names, symbols, and traditions while serving purposes that differ significantly from those of the original medieval order. These modern groups, while often sincere in their admiration for Templar ideals, represent new institutional developments rather than direct continuations of medieval traditions. The continuing influence of Templar imagery and popular culture demonstrates the enduring appeal of medieval chivalric ideals and the romantic fascination with secret societies and hidden knowledge. Video games, novels, films, and television programs continue to feature Templar characters and themes while adapting them to contemporary entertainment formats and cultural concerns. These popular treatments, while often historically inaccurate, maintain public awareness of Templar history while creating new interpretations that reflect current social and political anxieties. The academic study of Templar history continues to evolve as new documentary sources are discovered and analytical methods are refined. Recent scholarship has emphasized the order's role in medieval economic development, their contributions to military technology and organization, and their influence on the development of international law and diplomatic practices. This research has demonstrated that the Templars' historical significance extends far beyond the dramatic circumstances of their suppression to encompass fundamental contributions to European civilization that continue to influence contemporary institutions and practices. The legacy of the Knights Templar thus encompasses both their documented historical achievements and the rich mythology that has developed around their memory during the 7 centuries since their suppression. Their innovations in banking, military organization, and international commerce established foundations for modern European civilization, while their dramatic rise and fall provided raw material for countless legends, conspiracy theories, and popular entertainments. The continuing fascination with Templar history reflects both genuine appreciation for their historical significance and the enduring human attraction to stories about secret knowledge, hidden treasures, and the struggle between good and evil. The Templars' ultimate legacy lies not in the fantastic claims made about their secret knowledge or hidden survival, but in their documented contributions to the development of medieval European civilization and their role in establishing institutional frameworks that continue to influence modern society. Their systematic approach to organization, their innovations in financial services, and their professional military ethos establish precedents that shape the development of modern banking, military institutions, and international commerce. While the romantic legends surrounding their memory will undoubtedly continue to evolve, their genuine historical significance as pioneers of medieval European development remains their most enduring and valuable contribution to human civilization.